The islands of Japan rise like scattered brushstrokes across the sea. Mountains cloaked in mist, coasts beaten endlessly by waves, forests where moss carpets the roots of cedars older than memory itself. Here the air holds a quietness that is never empty. A listener might hear wind tumbling through pines as though it were a voice, or the low murmur of a stream as though it carried words. Every bend in the path, every ripple of water, carries the suggestion of a presence just beyond sight. To dwell in this land is to know that one never walks alone, for the unseen companions of earth and sky are always near. The ancients called it the land of Yojorozu no Kami, the country of 8 million gods. Not a number to be counted, but a phrase to express infinity. In every rock and river, in every rustling leaf, a spirit might dwell, some kind and protective, others mischievous, still others terrifying in their anger. In Japan, the divine is not locked away in heavens, distant from mortals, but woven into the very fabric of daily life. The gods dwell in shrines beneath tall trees, in the smoke of hearth fires, and in the shimmering mists that drift across rice paddies at dawn. Long before there were temples, scrolls, or even written words, the people told stories by firelight. They spoke of 2 figures, Izanagi and Izanami, who stood upon a floating bridge between heaven and earth. With a jeweled spear, they stirred the chaos below, drawing up drops of brine that hardened into islands. Japan was born, not of chance, but of deliberate shaping. These tales told of how life itself was first ordered, how the gods themselves walked upon the land, shaping mountains, rivers, and seas. Even now, the rustle of bamboo in the wind can sound like the first stirring of that spear across the waters of nothingness. From that creation flowed countless stories, of light and shadow, of laughter and grief. In the east, the sun goddess Amaterasu would one day illuminate the world with her brilliance, withdrawing her light only when sorrow or rage drew her into hiding. In the west, her brother Susanoo would bring storms crashing upon the earth, his wild spirit feared and revered alike. Between them, the moon god Tsukuyomi drifts in lonely silence, embodying night's cool distance. The sky itself was thought to be a family, its struggles mirrored in the turning of day into night, the brightening of summer, the dimming of winter. Yet the myths are not only of heaven, they speak also of Yomi, the land of shadow beneath the earth, a place where Izanagi once ventured, desperate to reclaim his lost love, only to recoil at the sight of her changed by death. In that tale, a stone was set between worlds, forever dividing the living from the dead. Still, even the boundary is not absolute. During certain nights, spirits are said to return, welcomed home with lanterns and dances, their presence felt as lightly as the brush of wind across a sleeve. Across the islands, shrines and holy places keep these myths alive. A mirror polished to brilliance might recall the one used to draw Amaterasu from her cave. A sword displayed in reverence may echo the blade found in the belly of a serpent. A jewel resting in its silken wrapping may represent benevolence passed from god to ruler. These are not mere relics of forgotten tales, but living treasures, binding the present to the timeless past. Even today, emperors trace their ancestry to these divine beginnings, walking as mortals who claim descent from heaven itself. And beyond the palaces and shrines, there are stories told in villages, whispered along mountain paths, sung beside the sea. Tales of heroes born from peaches, of fishermen who visited dragon palaces beneath the waves, of maidens who returned to the moon. There are monsters too, Oni who drink blood, fox spirits who trick or seduce, and snow women who freeze hearts with a breath. These myths are not confined to scrolls, but live in the laughter of festivals, the hush of snowfall, the gleam of firelight on lacquered masks. To walk into Japanese mythology is to step into a landscape where every shadow and every glimmer may conceal a story. A land where the divine is never far away, where gods and spirits have always lingered among the cedar groves, the mountain shrines, the tidal flats where cranes step like priests in white robes. As we journey together, we will wander through this land of story, from the spear that stirred the first waters, to the caves where the sun once hid, to the festivals that still light summer nights. It is a path winding between heaven, earth, and shadow, a path of myth that even now shapes the heartbeat of Japan. As we begin tonight's journey, I invite you to share where you are listening from, whether it's the glow of a city window, the quiet of a country road, a lantern-lit cabin, or a quiet corner on the far side of the world. It is always a joy to know where these tales are being heard, and by whom. Before there was land, before there were forests or seas, before even light had a place to shine, there was only chaos. A vast, drifting ocean of formlessness, heavy, dark, and yet strangely alive, as though it breathed in slow, unmeasured tides. No earth rose from its depths, no sky stretched above it. There was only swirling potential, waiting to be touched, waiting to be named. In that endless uncertainty, faint vibrations stirred. From above, heaven began to separate itself from earth, rising like a mist from a kettle. Between them there appeared a narrow span, a bridge not of stone or timber, but of vapor and silence. It was here, on that bridge, that the first pair of gods descended, gazing out upon the shapeless void beneath them. They were Izanagi, he who invites, and Izanami, she who invites. Brother and sister, husband and wife, twin lights set upon the bridge of creation. They were not yet as humans are, but vast and solemn, their voices carrying the resonance of eternity. In their hands they bore the jeweled spear, long and gleaming, its shaft adorned with gems that shimmered with the colors of dawn, its point curved and perfect, like the crescent of a new moon. This was the tool by which form would be given to the chaos below. Standing together, they lowered the spear into the sea of nothingness. Slowly, they stirred. The chaos heaved and swirled, and when they raised the spear again, droplets of brine fell from its tip. As they struck the surface, they hardened, becoming the first soil, the first land to rise from the ocean of formlessness. That island they named Onogoro, the self-forming. It lifted itself from the deep as though it had been waiting for their hand. To Onogoro they descended, stepping from the misted bridge down into a world that had only just been born. The air was cool, untested by wind. The ground trembled faintly as if unsure of its own weight. And yet here was a place that could be walked, that could hold a pillar, a shrine, a home. Izanagi and Izanami raised a towering post in the center of the island, a great pillar of heaven and earth, and built around it a hall where their union would be consecrated. It was the first structure ever made, the axis of a world still fragile in its youth. To bind their creation, they performed a ritual. They circled the pillar, one to the left, the other to the right, their footsteps echoing on the fresh earth. When they met again, Izanami spoke first. "What a fine young man you are." Her words seemed harmless, even affectionate, but they disturbed the natural balance. For it was Izanagi who should have spoken before her. Their union followed, yet from it was born a child without bones, soft and pale, unable to stand or breathe properly. They called him Hiruko, the leech child. With heavy hearts they placed him in a boat of reeds and let him drift away into the sea. They tried again, but again Izanami's words came first, and again the result was twisted and incomplete. Only when Izanagi spoke before her did harmony return. Then their children came in strength. From their union rose the islands of Japan, each solid, each distinct. Awaji, Shikoku, Kyushu, and at last Honshu, the great main island, stood proud above the sea. Around them lay others, Oki, Tsushima, Sado, forming a necklace of land upon the waters. Each island carried its own breath, its own voice, as though the soil itself had personality. And with these islands came gods to inhabit them. The god of wind roared across the waves, scattering salt spray and bending new grasses. The god of trees spread branches from the high mountains to the low valleys, laying shade upon the earth. The goddess of soil pressed her hands upon the land, making it firm and fertile, while the god of fields traced wide clearings where rice would someday grow. Each birth brought the world closer to fullness. The land of Japan began to take shape. Mountains lifted their heads, forests whispered with unseen voices, rivers carved winding paths down to the sea. Thunder rumbled in the sky, a new god stretching his limbs, while beneath the ground others stirred. Every element, every force, was born as divine. The world was not a silent machine, but a living chorus, each part carrying intention and will. For a time, Izanagi and Izanami rejoiced. Their children numbered in the dozens, then in the hundreds. Wherever they looked, new life unfolded. But creation carries its shadows. At last, Izanami became heavy with a child unlike the others. He was Kagutsuchi, the god of fire. His birth was agony. When he emerged from her, his body was made not of flesh, but of flame, searing everything he touched. His breath was smoke, his cry the roar of a furnace. As Izanami struggled to bring him forth, his fire consumed her from within. She writhed in pain, her skin blackened, her voice broke into cries that echoed across the islands. In the moment of his birth she was undone. Her body fell still, smoke curling from her form, her eyes dimming. Izanagi knelt beside her, overcome with grief. He tried to lift her head, to call her name, but her breath no longer stirred. The land seemed to grow silent around him, the rivers pausing, the winds holding still. The goddess who had given birth to seas and mountains, who had brought forth rivers, fields, and forests, was gone. His sorrow boiled into fury. With trembling hands he drew his blade and struck at Kagutsuchi, splitting the fiery child apart. The pieces scattered across the land, each fragment birthing new gods of destruction, volcanoes, lightning, wild flames that could consume without mercy. Izanagi's act rid the world of Kagutsuchi's body, but it could not quench the wound that had been torn open in his heart. Where Izanagi's tears struck the soil, gods of lament were born, deities who embodied grief itself. His sorrow shaped the world as surely as his joy had once done. From this moment forward, the Japanese understood that creation and loss are never separate. To bring forth life is to invite the shadow of death, and to love deeply is to risk the deepest grief. The cycle of joy and mourning, of beginnings and endings, began with Izanagi's tears. Yet grief alone could not hold him. He looked upon the world they had made together, the bright rivers, the lush mountains, the fertile fields, and all seemed hollow. Without Izanami, the world was no longer whole. In his heart a thought began to grow, impossible yet irresistible. She could not simply have vanished. Somewhere beyond the veil of the living, she must remain. Somewhere there must be a road leading to her. And so, though the gods warned of impurity, though the earth itself seemed to whisper against it, Izanagi resolved to descend into Yomi, the land of the dead, and call his beloved back to him. Thus ends the first chapter of Japan's story, a tale of creation mingled with loss, of islands rising from the sea only to be shadowed by grief. From the jeweled spear came the land, from the union of heaven and earth came the gods, and from fire came the first death. Izanagi's footsteps now turn toward Yomi, and with them begins a darker journey. For in Japan's myths, there is no creation without sorrow, and no life without the memory of loss. Grief gnawed at Izanagi's heart like an unceasing tide. Though the islands stood firm upon the waters, though rivers traced silver lines down mountains and forests spread their canopies across the land, he could see none of it. Every sight reminded him of Izanami's absence, of the voice that no longer answered his, of the warmth that had vanished from his side. Days and nights blurred. His divine hands shaped no new land. His voice summoned no more gods. There was only silence. At last, driven by love deeper than fear, he resolved upon a path no god had yet dared. He would follow her into the realm of death and bring her back. Yomi, the land of shadows, lay beneath the earth. It was not a place of fire or torment, but of stillness and corruption, where the brilliance of life dimmed into a grey half-existence. Its entrance yawned at the edge of the world, a cleft in the rock where the air grew stale and birds never sang. Izanagi stood at its mouth, his breath heavy, the scent of damp soil rising like a warning. Behind him lay the world of light, before him the unknown, yet his heart, bound by love and sorrow, carried him forward. Step by step, he descended. The further he walked, the more the world changed. The air grew thick, clinging to his skin like cold sweat. The sound of wind, the rustle of leaves, the crash of the sea, all faded into silence. His own heartbeat sounded loud in his ears, each step echoing strangely against the walls of rock. Darkness gathered. Not the darkness of night beneath stars, but a total absence, heavy and suffocating. He called her name, his voice trembling. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, a whisper rose from the depths. Her voice, Izanami's voice. It was weak, distant, yet unmistakable. "My husband, why have you come to this place?" Relief flooded him, and with it desperation. He cried out, begging her to return, to leave Yomi and walk again upon the living earth they had shaped together. For a long while there was silence, and the stillness of Yomi pressed upon him until he thought he would break. At last she answered, her tone heavy with sorrow. "You do not understand. I have eaten of the food of this land. I am bound here now. I cannot return." Her words struck him like a blow, but he clung to hope, pressing her to try. Izanami faltered, her voice softening. "Perhaps, if the rulers of Yomi permit it. But you must not look upon me while I seek their leave. Wait for me in patience." She withdrew, her footsteps fading into the unseen halls of shadow. Izanagi nodded, though she could no longer see him. He waited. Time stretched. The air thickened with decay, each breath a struggle. Hours passed, or perhaps days. In that endless silence doubt crept in. Was she truly still herself? Was she deceiving him? The need to know consumed him. From his sash he drew a comb, snapping off one of its teeth. With a prayer, he lit it, and it burned weakly, casting a trembling glow. He lifted it high, and the shadows retreated just enough for him to see. What he saw froze him in horror. Izanami stood before him, but not as he remembered. Her body was pale, her skin mottled, her eyes clouded and lifeless. Her lips were split, her hair tangled, her form crawling with maggots. From her limbs dripped decay. The stench filled his throat until he could hardly breathe. She was no longer the radiant goddess who had given birth to the islands and rivers, but a corpse, a ruin of beauty, defiled by death. At the light's touch she stirred, her eyes widened in shame and rage. "You have looked upon me," she cried, her voice echoing with both sorrow and fury. From the shadows the hags of Yomi shrieked awake, hideous crones with long talons, guardians of the underworld. They rushed forward, joined by shades of warriors who had died long ago, their armor rusted, their swords chipped yet deadly. From her body crawled more horrors, foul spirits born of rot, dragging themselves toward Izanagi. The silence of Yomi shattered into a cacophony of pursuit. Terror seized him. He fled, torch sputtering in his hand, his feet slamming against the stone floor of the cavern. The hags shrieked behind him, their voices like knives. Corpses lumbered in pursuit, shadows stretching long and sharp. He flung his comb's remaining teeth behind him, and where they struck the ground, bamboo shoots burst forth, thick and tangled. The hags stumbled, shrieking in frustration. He tore peaches from his pouch, fruit blessed with purity, and hurled them back. Their light and sweetness struck the creatures, who recoiled with burning cries, unable to withstand their cleansing power. Still he ran, sweat streaming, lungs burning, as Izanami herself pursued, her fury shaking the cavern. At last, the faintest breath of fresh air touched his face. The entrance lay ahead, pale light spilling across the earth. With all his strength, he stumbled forward, emerging into the world above. But Izanami was close behind, her rotting form pressing from the darkness. In desperation, Izanagi seized a great boulder, one so vast no mortal could hope to move it, and rolled it across the cavern mouth. The stone thundered into place, sealing the passage. He fell against it, panting, his body trembling from the terror of his flight. From the other side came her voice, muffled but clear, thick with rage and sorrow. "If you leave me here, I will kill 1,000 of your people each day." Izanagi pressed his hand to the stone, tears soaking the soil beneath him, and answered, "Then I will give life to 1,500 every day." Thus, death and birth were bound together, loss and renewal set into eternal balance. The stone remained, a barrier between worlds. On one side, the land of the living, bright yet fragile. On the other, Yomi, shadowed and impure, where even gods could be defiled. Izanagi's heart was broken, yet from his ordeal came a truth that would shape the living forever. Death is pollution, a shadow that clings. To face it is to risk corruption. To walk among the dead is to lose one's purity. From that day, he sought cleansing, washing himself in rivers, purifying his skin and soul, and from his rites of purification, new gods would be born. Thus ended Izanagi's descent into Yomi, not with reunion, but with a stone between love and death. What he saw could never be forgotten. The people who remembered his tale would honor its lesson, to revere the dead, but to keep them apart from the living. Purity must be guarded, defilement cleansed, for the two are forever divided. And yet, in dreams and in shadows, Izanami's voice still lingers, a reminder that love does not vanish, even when death has claimed its form. From the tears, the breath, and the purification of Izanagi came 3 children whose names would endure as long as Japan itself. Amaterasu, the shining sun goddess, born from his left eye, carried warmth and brilliance in her very being. Tsukuyomi, born from his right eye, drifted cool and detached, a silent ruler of the night. And from his nose came Susanoo, the stormborn, whose voice rolled like thunder, and whose temper lashed like waves against cliffs. These siblings were meant to bring balance to heaven and earth, light, rhythm, and storm. Yet harmony among them proved fragile, for the world of gods is never free from conflict. Amaterasu's light spread across the fields and forests, blessing rice shoots as they lifted green blades from wet soil. Her radiance banished the shadows where demons stirred, bringing calm to the hearts of those who prayed. To her people she was not a distant star, but a living warmth, the reason crops ripened and mornings dawned. She was revered with polished mirrors, with folded paper streamers, with the soft sweep of ritual dances. Her brilliance was order itself. But Susanoo, fierce, unpredictable Susanoo, knew no such balance. Though given the seas to rule, he turned from his duty, howling instead of tending, raging instead of guiding. The heavenly plain trembled under his tantrums. He trampled the rice fields of the gods, scattering stalks before they bore grain. He tore open dikes, letting sacred waters spill across the land. He bellowed his grief for his lost mother, swearing he would abandon heaven altogether and plunge into Yomi. His storms battered coastlines, whipped trees into splinters, and churned the seas into chaos. At times he wept so violently that rivers overflowed their banks. At times he laughed with such cruelty that villages cowered beneath thunderclouds. His very presence was disorder, the fury of nature untamed. His rampage grew darker still. In wild abandon, Susanoo desecrated Amaterasu's weaving hall, a sacred place where divine maidens wove garments for the gods. He flung filth upon the floor, laughing as the sacred looms were defiled. Then, in a final act of outrage, he hurled the flayed body of a sacred horse into the chamber. Its blood splattered across the walls. Its body crashed down upon the maidens. One of them fell dead, pierced by the broken shuttle of her loom. The hall of weaving fell silent, its sacred order torn apart. Amaterasu stood in horror. The storm's fury had become cruelty beyond bearing. Her heart, so long patient, so long the source of balance, broke. She turned from the world she had lit with her smile. With heavy steps she left her palace of brilliance, her radiance dimming as sorrow swallowed her. To the heavenly rock dwelling she fled, a cavern deep in the mountains. With her own hands, she rolled a massive stone before its entrance, shutting herself inside. Within that darkness she crouched, gathering her light close to her chest, hiding it away. At once, heaven and earth were plunged into shadow. The sun vanished. Morning did not come. Fields yellowed, their stalks bowing without ripening. The air grew chill. Frost lingered where once dew had sparkled. Without her warmth, people shivered, beasts lay thin, crops shriveled. Demons crept from mountain hollows, gloating in the dark. Spirits of pestilence drifted through villages. Prayers fell silent, for even the priests had lost hope. The world seemed to wither, as though it too mourned the retreat of its mother. The gods assembled in dismay. 800 deities crowded the riverbed of heaven, their voices murmuring like an anxious sea. What could be done? Without Amaterasu, all would unravel. They debated and argued, but none dared approach her by force. If the stone was broken open, she might retreat forever. If threats were spoken, she might refuse to shine again. They needed cunning, ritual, and joy. the opposite of Susanoo's cruelty. Only by drawing her forth willingly could the sun return. So they prepared a great rite before the cave. They uprooted a sakaki tree, sacred and evergreen, and raised it high. From its branches they hung white cloth like falling streams and jewels that shimmered faintly in the gloom. At its heart they placed a mirror, polished to a brilliance that captured even the faintest glimmers of firelight. Fires were kindled, drums readied, offerings laid out in hope. Around the clearing the gods stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed upon the sealed cavern, their hearts bound in one desperate desire, to call the sun back. At the center of the gathering stood Uzume, the goddess of dawn and laughter. Her hair shone loose about her shoulders, her face lit with a fearless grin. She overturned a wooden tub, climbed atop it, and began to dance. At first her steps were steady, her feet beating a rhythm like a drum. Then she loosened her robe, baring her shoulders, stamping harder. She sang bawdy songs, her laughter bubbling up like spring water. Her sleeves flew like wings as she spun, her hair whipping about her face. She shouted jokes that made even the solemn gods double over. The air filled with clapping, laughter, shouts of delight. The gods forgot despair, forgot shadow. Their joy rose like a storm of mirth, shaking the very plain of heaven. The tub rattled beneath Uzume's pounding feet, her voice soaring in bawdy song, her eyes gleaming with wild mischief. The more she laughed, the more the gods roared, their voices rolling together, until the dark sky trembled with their mirth. From within the cave, Amaterasu stirred. The sound reached her, strange, impossible. "Why do they laugh?" she whispered. "The world lies in ruin. Why do they rejoice?" Curiosity tugged at her. Slowly she pressed her hands to the stone and shifted it, leaving only a crack. From the shadows she peered out, eyes narrowing. Before her stood the mirror, gleaming. In its surface she saw a figure radiant beyond measure. She gasped. Had another taken her place? The gods shouted as one, "We rejoice, for a goddess more glorious than Amaterasu is here among us." Jealousy and wonder kindled in her chest. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on the figure shining in the mirror. The boulder shifted further aside. Her light spilled through the gap, brushing the plain in golden beams for the first time in long weeks. In that instant, two gods leapt forward. They seized her hands, pulling her into the open. The mirror still shone before her, dazzling her eyes with her own brilliance. Behind her, the stone was rolled fully aside. Amaterasu stood blinking, bewildered, her light washing over heaven once more. Darkness fled, shadows shriveled, rivers sparkled, fields lifted their heads, birds burst into song. The laughter of the gods rose into jubilation. The world breathed again. Amaterasu, still wounded in heart, looked upon the joy of her kin and the relief in their eyes. She saw Uzume dancing, sleeves whirling, face bright with triumph. Her anger softened. Though Susanoo's crime had driven her to despair, she could not abandon the living. She swore then to shine again, to guide heaven and earth, to be their unending dawn. Susanoo was cast down for his crimes, stripped of his place in heaven. He fell to the mortal world, storms raging at his heels. His exile would carry him to new trials, new battles, and legends of his own. But for now the order of heaven was restored. Amaterasu's light filled the skies, steady and unbroken. The mirror that had lured her forth was enshrined, polished and kept forever, a treasure of emperors to come. And so the lesson of the cave was remembered in every age. When sorrow weighs heavy, laughter may call back the light. When anger seals away brilliance, ritual and joy can coax it forth again. Amaterasu returned not because of threats or force, but because of mirth, music, and the gleam of her own reflection. Her tale became a dance, retold in festivals, reenacted in shrines, remembered every time dawn followed night. Thus it was proven, order can be restored after chaos, warmth after storm, light after despair. The sun goddess shines not merely because she is the sun, but because the world remembers to call her, with laughter, with ritual, with love. When Susanoo was cast from the high plane of heaven, the winds howled in his wake. His exile was not gentle. He fell with the fury of storms at his heels, his roar scattering clouds, his sorrow turning rivers wild. Where he landed, the air shook as though thunder had touched the earth. Mountains loomed before him, forests bent in the gale of his breath. He was no longer the storming brother who rampaged in heaven's halls, but a god cast down among mortals, stripped of honor, carrying only his restless spirit and a will yet untamed. He wandered the land, following the bend of rivers, the sweep of valleys, the lines where mountains pressed against the sky. Wherever he went, people trembled. Some fled at the sight of him, fearing his wrath, for his face still carried the fire of exile. Yet others bowed low, sensing his divinity even in disgrace, offering him rice and water, prayers and fearful respect. In his heart storms still raged, yet a hunger grew, not for destruction, but for a place to root himself, a deed to give meaning to his fall. At last he came upon a river whose banks whispered with sorrow. There sat an aged couple, their robes torn, their faces hollowed with grief. Between them knelt a young maiden, her eyes swollen from weeping, her hands twisting in her lap. Susanoo approached, his footsteps heavy as thunder. The couple bowed, trembling, and when he asked the cause of their despair, their words spilled out like water breaking from a dam. "We are Ashinazuchi and Tenazuchi," the old man said, voice shaking. "Once we were blessed with 8 daughters, as lovely as blossoms along the river. But each year the serpent comes, Yamata no Orochi, with 8 heads and 8 tails, its belly swollen with blood, its back bristling with trees. Each year it demands a child, and each year we have given one. 7 daughters have been devoured. Only Kushinada remains. Tonight, the serpent comes again." His wife sobbed softly, rocking the girl as though she were still a child, as though arms alone could shield her from the doom that waited. Susanoo's heart stirred at their tale. His exile had stripped him of glory, but here was ruin far greater than his own. He looked upon Kushinada, trembling like a reed in the wind, and resolve welled within him. "If I slay this beast," he said, his voice rolling like distant thunder, "will you give me your daughter's hand? Let her be my wife, and I will free your house from sorrow." The couple, desperate, bowed low, their foreheads to the ground. "Yes," they whispered. "Save her, and she is yours." To keep her safe, Susanoo transformed Kushinada into a fine ivory comb, delicate and gleaming, and set her in his hair close to his brow, where she could watch from safety as he prepared. Then he set about his plan, for strength alone could not defeat Yamata no Orochi. The serpent's body was vast as 8 valleys, its power immeasurable. Susanoo ordered the family to brew the strongest sake they could make, rich and intoxicating. 8 great vats were filled, their aroma sweet and heavy, and he placed them along the banks of the river, one before each place where a head might lower. The smell filled the air, thick and enticing, mingling with the cool breath of the river. The sky darkened, a tremor rippled through the earth. From the folds of the mountains came the monster. Yamata no Orochi was more terror than flesh. Its body stretched for miles, coiling like a living range of hills. Its scales glistened dark as iron. Its 8 heads rose like towers, each more steaming with poisonous breath. Its eyes glowed red as molten stone, unblinking, merciless. Fir trees and cypresses bristled from its back as though it carried forests upon its spine. Its bellies dragged swollen across the earth, staining the ground with blood and slime. The sound of its approach was a roar of breaking trees and sliding rock, a nightmare advancing with the patience of inevitability. The serpent reached the river and paused, its 8 heads weaving, tasting the air. Then one by one they lowered to the vats of sake. The scent bewitched it, rich and overwhelming. Tongues flickered, lips slavered, and each head began to drink. The monster gulped greedily, foam spilling from its jaws, tails thrashing in delight. The vats emptied quickly, but the serpent did not rise. Instead, its movements slowed, its eyes rolled, its head sagged heavy with drunkenness. Soon its entire body swayed unsteadily, the vast coils loosening, its fury dulled. Susanoo's chance had come. With a shout that split the night, he drew his sword. He rushed upon the beast, leaping onto its swaying coils. His blade flashed, and with each stroke a head fell, severed, shrieking. Blood gushed like rivers, steaming where it struck the ground. The serpent thrashed, its tails lashing like crashing waves, its body tearing trees from the earth. Susanoo pressed on, striking again and again, lightning seeming to leap with every blow. The gods of the mountains and rivers watched in awe, their voices rising in cries of wonder. The serpent's death was not swift. Even drunk, its fury was immense. One head lunged, fangs snapping, and Susanoo rolled aside, his blade carving deep into its throat. Another coiled around him, nearly crushing his ribs, but he plunged his sword upward, piercing scale and sinew until the coil fell limp. Still others struck blindly, jaws clashing like thunder, but his strikes were relentless. He was the storm-given flesh, his fury now turned to purpose. At last, 7 heads lay broken, the earth a mire of blood and shattered bone. Only one tail still writhed with monstrous strength. Raising his blade, Susanoo struck down upon it, yet instead of yielding, the steel rang against something hidden within. Surprised, he cut deeper, splitting the tail apart. There, gleaming amidst flesh and blood, lay a sword, a blade not of mortal forging, but of divine perfection. Its edge shone with brilliance, its form flawless, as though fire and heaven had conspired to create it. Susanoo lifted it high, marveling at its weightless power. This was no mere weapon, but a treasure of the gods. He named it Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi, the sword of the gathering clouds of heaven. In ages to come it would be called Kusanagi, the grass cutter, and enshrined as one of the 3 imperial treasures of Japan. At last the serpent lay still. Its vast body sprawled across mountains and valleys, its blood staining the river. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of its dying breath. Susanoo lowered his sword, his chest heaving, his hair matted with sweat. In his hair the comb gleamed, and from it he drew forth Kushinada, restored to her form, her face radiant with relief. Her parents fell at her feet, weeping with joy. Susanoo had kept his word. He took Kushinada as his wife, but not as a prize of battle. Together they built a palace in the land of Suga, where the winds swept across green fields and the river ran clear. There, Susanoo composed a song, the first poem of Japan, his voice softened by love. Many clouds arise, forming a mighty fence. To enclose my bride, let the clouds form a fence. His storming heart was calmed, if only for a time, by the shelter of love. Yet the sword was not his to keep. In a rare act of humility, Susanoo offered it to his sister Amaterasu as a token of peace, a gesture to heal the rift his wildness had torn. The sun goddess accepted the gift, and from then on the blade became part of the sacred regalia of Japan, carried in reverence as a symbol of divine authority. From the chaos of exile and fury, Susanoo had given the world not only deliverance from terror, but a relic of eternal order. Thus the tale of Susanoo and Yamata no Orochi is told, of storm turned to salvation, of a monster undone by cunning and courage, of a sword born from within the coils of chaos. The people remember it in song and in shrine, in the gleam of blades and the rush of rivers. For in this tale, as in all the myths of Japan, destruction and creation walk hand in hand, and even the wildest storm can leave behind a treasure to endure through the ages. Among the 3 children born of Izanagi's cleansing stood one who was neither storm nor blazing sun, but something quieter. Tsukuyomi, the moon god, emerged from the right eye of the creator, his presence cool and distant. Where Amaterasu warmed the world with radiance, and Susanoo shook it with fury, Tsukuyomi offered calm. His light was not his own, but a reflection, silver and serene, cast upon the waters of night. He moved with dignity, his voice measured, his gaze steady as the arc of his path across the heavens. Yet within this calmness lay a severity that would one day shatter harmony itself. For a time, the siblings shared the vault of heaven. Amaterasu strode the day, filling the fields with light. Tsukuyomi followed in twilight, his silver glow cooling the earth, softening shadows without banishing them. Together they brought rhythm to the sky, a dance of warmth and rest, brightness and stillness. But balance is fragile. It takes only one moment, one act, to shift the course of eternity. That moment came when Amaterasu entrusted Tsukuyomi with a task, to attend a sacred feast in her name. The goddess who prepared the feast was Ukemochi, the deity of food. She stood radiant in her humble way, her body a vessel of sustenance itself. At her lips prayers became nourishment, her breath releasing rice, fish, and wild herbs, her throat bringing forth the gifts of land and sea. Before Tsukuyomi she laid a banquet, steaming bowls of grain, shimmering fish fresh from the rivers, deer and boar roasted with the scent of pine smoke. To mortals it would have been miraculous, a table conjured from divine flesh, a reminder that life is born from life. But Tsukuyomi did not see blessing. He saw shame. In his eyes, the act of drawing food from one's body was not sacred creation, but pollution. His dignity recoiled. The calm mask of his face hardened into judgment. Cold as moonlight upon ice, he rose from his seat, drew his sword, and struck. In a single blow, he cut down Ukemochi where she stood. Her cry echoed, then stilled. The feast fell silent, her body lying broken upon the earth. Yet even in death she gave. From her body sprang cattle, their hides gleaming with life. From her belly came rice grains, spilling across the ground like scattered stars. From her mouth, once more, issued fish and wild game, now forever bound to the soil and waters of the world. The people would never hunger, for her sacrifice seeded the earth with eternal provision. But the act was not hers alone. It was tied forever to Tsukuyomi's blade, to the judgment that had slain her. When Amaterasu learned what had happened, her fury shook the heavens. "How could you?" she cried. "She offered you plenty, she fed the world, and you repaid her with death." Her radiance blazed hotter than midsummer. Her voice rang like fire on steel. From that day she turned her face from Tsukuyomi. "Never again will I look upon you." Never again will the sun walk beside the moon. Her words became decree, her anger a dividing line in the sky itself. From that moment, the siblings were sundered. Amaterasu rose by day, striding the sky in brilliance. Tsukuyomi followed only after she had vanished, his silver glow a pale echo that could never meet her gaze. Day and night became divided, never to cross except in fleeting moments of eclipse, rare and uncanny, as though the siblings brushed shoulders only to retreat once more. Their quarrel became the order of time, the endless cycle of light and darkness, warmth and coolness, life and rest. Some say Tsukuyomi felt no remorse. They claim his cold light is proof of his pride, a stern reminder that dignity matters more than abundance, that purity cannot be compromised. Others whisper that his glow is sorrow itself, a silver grief cast down upon the sleeping earth. They imagine him watching his sister from afar, yearning, his face veiled with regret he cannot speak. In his silence lies mystery, and in his distance, a loneliness unending. Yet all agree on the truth of their division. Sun and moon are eternal opposites, bound by conflict into rhythm. Where the sun blazes, the moon retreats. Where the moon rises, the sun sinks. Their discord gave the world its pulse, its ceaseless turning. And so, from one act of violence at a feast, came the pattern by which all beings live, morning and evening, day and night, light and shadow. The world had been restored to light. Amaterasu shone once more from the heavens, her brilliance steady after the shadows of the cave. Yet she knew that her work was not complete. The earth below was fertile, the islands wide and rich, but without order they would drift like leaves upon a restless river. Mortals tilled fields, raised villages, and offered prayers, but they needed guidance, a bridge between heaven's clarity and the soil beneath their feet. And so Amaterasu looked among her descendants, seeking one who could carry her will into the realm of men. Her gaze fell upon Ninigi, her grandson, radiant and noble, whose presence bore the warmth of the sun and the steadiness of a young tree. She summoned him to her palace in the high plain of heaven, where clouds drifted like silver veils across a sky without end. The halls glittered with jewels and banners, the air heavy with the scent of offerings and the murmur of prayers rising from below. Before her gathered the assembled gods, wise elders with flowing beards, warriors with eyes sharp as blades, maidens who carried the fragrance of blossoms in their hair. All stood in silence as Amaterasu rose, her light casting long beams across the heavenly court. "Ninigi," she said, her voice both gentle and commanding, "it is time for you to descend. The earth waits for a ruler who carries our order, our truth, our spirit. You shall go to the land of reed plains, to dwell among mortals, to lead them as both god and man." To send him unarmed, unprepared, would have been folly. Instead, Amaterasu entrusted him with 3 treasures, each embodying the essence of divine rule. First, she gave him the mirror, polished until it caught not only light, but truth itself. "When you look upon this mirror," she told him, "see not only your reflection, but the soul of heaven. Rule with honesty, for truth is the foundation upon which all harmony rests." Then she placed in his hands the jewel, smooth and radiant, its glow soft as starlight. "This jewel holds the spirit of benevolence. Rule with kindness and compassion, and the people will flourish as fields beneath spring rain." Finally, she bestowed the sword Kusanagi, the blade taken from the serpent Orochi, still gleaming with its divine edge. "This sword is courage. Rule with bravery, and defend the land against chaos and ruin." Together the treasures formed the sacred regalia, symbols not of wealth but of ideals. Truth, benevolence, and courage. These were to be the pillars of his reign, the guiding stars of the imperial line that would follow. Amaterasu's hands lingered upon them, as though passing not only objects, but her very will into Ninigi's care. Around the hall, the gods murmured, voices rising in reverence, for they knew this moment was more than a blessing. It was the shaping of destiny, the weaving of heaven into the fabric of earth. Before his departure, the gods gathered to guide and protect him. Omoikane, deity of wisdom, counseled him in the ways of discernment. Ame-no-Koyan, forefather of ritual, promised to carry sacred words to earth so that prayers would never falter. Futotama, bearer of offerings, swore to sustain him with rites that bind the unseen to the seen. Even the storm-born Susanoo, once wild and feared, was remembered through the sword in Ninigi's hand, a reminder that even chaos could be forged into order. Surrounded by counsel, gifts, and divine voices, Ninigi bowed to his grandmother, his eyes solemn, his resolve unshaken. The moment of descent came. The clouds parted like a curtain, revealing the world below. Mountains rising like teeth from mist, rivers glimmering as silver threads, fields lying in shadow, waiting for the dawn of order. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of pine and salt, of soil rich and ready. Ninigi stepped forward, the treasures close to his chest, and began his journey downward. With him came attendants, gods of ritual, of word, of protection, but it was he who bore the burden of rule. As he descended, the brilliance of heaven faded behind him, and the murmur of the mortal world rose, faint but insistent, like a chorus waiting for its conductor. He touched down upon the peak of a mountain, where the clouds still brushed the earth, and the air was thin and clear. The land of Ashihara no Nakatsukuni, the reed plain middle land, lay before him, a place of rivers winding through fields, forests crowding valleys, waves striking against the shorelines of the new-made isles. Here Ninigi set his feet, the treasures gleaming at his side. Around him the wind hushed, as though even the spirits of the land paused to witness the arrival of heaven's envoy. From this moment, the divine bloodline was established. Ninigi was no longer merely a grandson of the sun goddess. He was the bridge between heaven and earth, the bearer of treasures that would guide rulers for generations. His children, and their children after them, would carry his light, until at last his descendant Jimmu would set forth to found the imperial line of Japan. The treasures he bore were not only objects, but symbols of legitimacy, of the divine sanction that would forever set the emperors apart. And so the descent of Ninigi marked a turning point in the story of Japan. No longer were the tales only of gods who quarreled, wept, and rejoiced above. Now the threads of myth and the paths of mortals were woven together. The mirror of truth, the jewel of benevolence, and the sword of courage came to rest upon the earth, carried not as relics but as promises. In their gleam, heaven and humanity found union. From Ninigi's descent the years unrolled like silk, and in the west a lineage took root among river valleys and pine-dark ridges. Children learned to bow before the mirror, to hold the jewel with care, to treat the sword as a promise rather than a hunger. Out of that house a boy grew into a leader with a gaze that held sunrise within it. He was called Jimmu. The stories say his stride had patience, his voice carried steadiness, and in his hand the regalia gleamed with the old light of heaven. Around him the western lands drew breath and prospered, yet his eyes always drifted east, toward plains he had never walked, and a destiny whispered by ancestors whose faces he knew only in prayer. He was raised among paddies that mirrored the sky, and along coasts beaten by winter swells. The people around him were carvers of boats and planters of rice, guardians of small shrines tucked into cedar shade. Their chiefs wore lacquered armor that creaked when they bowed, and they spoke of the central country as a place of broad fields, where a throne could stand on level ground. Jimmu listened. In the evenings, he would lay the mirror upon a mat and kneel before it until his breath matched the stillness it held. He kept the jewel near his palm when judgments were made, to soften the edge of anger. He trained with the blade to remind himself that courage is a duty, not a flame to wave at friends. When his brothers were old enough to carry spears without trembling, Jimmu gathered them beneath a roof, bright with smoke, and said the thing he had carried for years. The center of the islands called to them. The reed plain middle land would not unite itself. To reach it they would need patience through swamps and endurance over ridges. They would need the favor of their grandmother who rose each morning. The brothers agreed. Oars were carved, hulls tarred, grain dried, offerings tied with white paper, and hung where the wind could lift them like little wings. Their boats pushed from the western shore at dawn. The oarlocks groaned, gulls argued, and wet ropes coiled like river serpents on planks. Land fell behind in a haze of blue. Ahead lay channels that opened suddenly into broad water, and then narrowed into green throats where the current tugged at the keel. Nights they slept under reeds, insect song loud as any drum. Days they followed the glitter of a river, without knowing where it bent beyond the next headland. Men murmured to their household gods, and touched amulets tied at the wrist. Jimmu stood in the bow, the mirror wrapped in its silk, the jewel cool against his palm, the sword at his hip heavy with remembered thunder. They reached Naniwa, where tides roll through a low country of marsh and hill. There they met resistance that did not bow to lineages or listen to stories of heaven. A chieftain with old claims rallied warriors under banners stained with years of weather. Spears set in rows like a forest. Arrows darkened the air. The first clash broke across the shallows, men slipping on weed-slick stones, shields ringing, voices torn into shouts. Jimmu's elder brother took an arrow in the ribs and copied the river's curve as he fell. The water carried him in a slow turning that felt colder than winter. That night, the camp's fire ate quietly, while grief sat beside every bowl. Doubt walked the lines like a watchman. The men had left fields that needed tending, and families who counted the days. Jimmu moved among them without a crown above his brow, speaking in a low voice that matched their fatigue. He spoke of the path that began when a grandson stepped down from the sky, and how roads chosen by ancestors are seldom easy underfoot. He said the regalia were made for days like this, when truth is hard and mercy feels costly, and courage asks a price in blood. He did not promise swift victory. He promised that the East was not a rumor. They tried the inland hills and found the trees tight as soldiers. They tried the waterways and found the current against them. At the edge of despair, a sound like a small bell crossed the silence of noon, a beating of wings that did not come from ordinary birds. From the light above descended a crow with 3 legs, black as lacquer when night turns wet. Its eyes held an ember's heart. It settled on a branch near Jimmu and cocked its head as if to say, "Walk exactly here." Jimmu bowed until his forehead touched the soil. His men followed, armor creaking, hands pressed over hearts. He called the bird by its name that was older than arrows, Yatagarasu, and thanked the one whose light lives in mirrors. When he rose, the crow lifted, glided ahead, and paused. This it did again and again, leading them across slopes where paths dissolved under ferns and through ravines where voices came back changed. When they drifted, the bird returned and scolded from a stone. When they tangled in thicket, it waited on a cedar tip until they untied themselves from branches. They crossed into the Yamato Basin where land opens like a calm breath. Rivers lay like cords woven by a careful hand, fields, congregation ready, mountains keeping a circle without crowding the floor. The crow perched on a white boulder and watched them enter. Jimmu stood still long enough to feel the air settle differently upon his shoulders. In that hush, he lifted the jewel and held it for the men to see. "This place answers," he said, and the wind seemed to nod through the grass. The people of this place were not shadows waiting for a tale to arrive. They had chiefs whose names meant roots older than memory, guardians of passes, builders of dikes, keepers of songs tied to hillsides. Envoys walked out with measured steps, armor oiled, faces painted in earth colors. Some offered gifts, testing. Some asked by what right these newcomers carried heaven's talk into their valleys. Jimmu received them beneath a pennant stitched with the sun mark, and answered with the mirror unwrapped between them. He spoke of order, as a garden that needs tending, of harvests that grow larger when quarrels shrink, of law that steadies the hand holding the seed. Not all envoys returned to their halls in peace. Spears crossed in ravines where moss grew like fur. Shields locked on ridges that cut the sky. The ground learned the weight of struggle and the taste of iron. A rival lord sprang ambushes from tall grass and sent arrows that hissed like snakes. Jimmu led from the front when the ground narrowed, and he led from the rear when the line wavered, keeping its spine from breaking. The crow circled above screams, and then drifted toward the next bend in the land, as if drawing maps with its wings. In a final meeting beside a river that slid under reed and willow, the strongest enemy stood across from Jimmu, with a face that looked carved rather than grown. He asked again what gave the newcomer claim. Jimmu lifted the sword that once slept in a serpent's tail and planted its tip gently in the mud without cutting anything living. "This," he said, "reminds me to be brave against chaos, not against farmers. This mirror," and he uncovered it, "reminds me to see as heaven would see, without flattering myself. This jewel," and he held it so that it caught late sun, "reminds me to keep the hand open when a closed fist would be easier." The rival lowered his spear. Some followed him. Others fought until evening took the colors from their banners. When resistance finally loosened like a knot dragged through water, Jimmu asked the crow to rest. It settled upon the ridgepole of a hall just rising, as carpenters wedged beams and sang to keep rhythm. The new palace did not scrape the sky. Its posts smelled of fresh-cut cedar. On the day chosen for enthronement, smoke from cooking fires braided with incense from a simple altar. The regalia were placed where eyes could meet them without fear. Priests spoke words carried from the high plain, syllables old enough to calm a tired army. Jimmu stood before people who had watched him arrive in hunger and in hope. He looked like a man who had slept little and learned much. He did not float above the ground. His sandal straps had rubbed his heels raw. He took the mirror into his hands and felt every judgment it would require. He set the jewel upon his palm and thought of widows who would need grain when storms drowned a season. He touched the sword and remembered names he would never say aloud again. Then he sat where the woven mat waited, and the hall breathed with the quiet of ascent. Messengers carried word along river roads and through gates draped with rope and paper streamers. Potters tapped clay to hear if it rang true. Fishermen glanced toward mountains and made the sign that thanks the bird with 3 legs. Farmers pressed seedlings into mud and spoke the emperor's name with the same care they used to set a post straight. In market squares, people argued over whether the date would be remembered as the first year of an age or simply the day the taxes would change. In shrines, the caretakers polished little mirrors and set offerings of rice and salt so clean you could hear their freshness. scribes took up brushes and wrote that his reign began in a year we now call 660 before the common counting. The ink mapped a bridge between memory and hope. Generations later, those strokes would be read by hands tracing ancestors back to a throne woven from reed and lore. The palace at Yamato sent envoys to places that had known only neighbors. Roads were cut level where feet had followed deer trails. The crown's words traveled faster than trouble for the first time anyone could recall, and where they traveled the fields seemed to lie flatter beneath the wind. The Amaterasu did not vanish when the carpentry ended. Hunters saw it at dawn when fog stitched the lowlands. Priests glimpsed it at noon perched upon the shadow of a gate. Children swore it watched them race along levees and always let the slower one win. Those who love explanations say its legs stand for heaven, earth, and people moving together instead of pulling apart. Those who love stories say it is the sun's private companion who takes wing when the goddess must speak without words. Jimmu ruled as a man who knew that hunger rots peace more quickly than insult, and that a single harsh decree can echo for seasons. Disputes were heard before the mirror, so lies stumbled. Mercy travelled with officials who carried the jewel in silk. The sword left its scabbard less often than angry men expected. When it did, borders settled back into their lines with relief. Festivals braided old dances with new oaths. The throne learned to sit with patience, while petitions piled like autumn leaves. At night, when braziers breathed red and the court's noise thinned, Jimmu would sometimes walk alone to the eaves. From there the basin looked like a bowl holding reflections. He would lift the mirror and catch a fragment of moon, and wonder whether his sister in the sky still watched, as she had the day the bird descended. He would hold the jewel and feel the small pulse of its glow against the bone of his hand. He would rest the sword across his knees and measure his breath until the iron cooled. The tale says that in those moments he knew exactly what he was. A descendant who carried the heat of heaven in human ribs, a farmer's judge who understood the weight of a handful of grain, a traveller whose feet had learned each kind of earth between river and ridge. He was the meeting place where prayer and law exchange gifts. He was a hinge that lets a door swing between worlds without tearing the frame. From that hinge, the house of rule opened. The emperors who followed spoke of him when they lifted the mirror to check their faces for pride. They asked the jewel to soften their anger before messengers were sent. They touched the sword and tasted iron on the tongue as a warning against haste. When capital cities shifted, the story still stayed. A man walked east with brothers, failed, received a bird, learned the land's turns, and sat down where mountains do not crowd the fields. So myth leaned forward into history, and history leaned back into myth, until the two held each other upright. The eastward march did not end when the banners were furled. It runs under every road that crosses the Yamato plain. The crow's path still lies in the ways people choose when the map smudges. The regalia still glimmer whenever truth, kindness, and courage arrive in the same room. When the sun climbs over rice that stands in sheets of water, and a hawk's shadow moves like a sentence, the old promise breathes again. Heaven has not forgotten the earth, and the earth still remembers the steps that brought a throne to the center of the islands. Long after the age when gods quarreled in heaven and emperors claimed their thrones upon earth, there came stories of heroes born not of divine halls, but of humble households. Among them, none is more cherished than Momotaro, the boy from the peach. His tale is not of dynasties or heavenly treasures, but of purity, kindness, and courage that grows in the hearts of ordinary people. Where Amaterasu and Susanoo embody the forces of the cosmos, Momotaro stands for the simple strength that even mortals can carry, the bravery that lives in innocence. There was once an old man and an old woman who lived together in a village by the river. Their house was small, its roof of thatch golden in summer, its hearth warm in winter. They had lived long years in peace, yet sorrow lingered, for no child's laughter filled their home. Each day the old man went into the forest to cut wood, and each day the old woman walked down to the river to wash clothes upon the stones. Life was steady, but lonely. One morning, as the old woman scrubbed her cloth against the smooth rocks, she saw something strange drifting down the current. It was a peach, round and bright, glowing with a radiance more golden than the morning sun. Larger than any fruit she had ever seen, it bobbed upon the waves as though carried by purpose. She waded into the shallows and caught it in her arms. Laughing with delight, she carried it home, calling to her husband that fortune had at last smiled upon them. "Look, a peach so grand it could feed us for days," she said. Together they split the peach open, but instead of juice or flesh they found within a child. A boy, rosy-cheeked, sleeping peacefully. His breath was steady, his form perfect, his face shining with innocence. Astonished, the couple fell to their knees in thanks, for heaven had granted them what their years had denied. They named him Momotaro, Peach Boy, and raised him as their own. The hut that had been silent now rang with laughter, and the old man and woman felt young again, their hearts lightened by the presence of a child. Momotaro grew quickly. He was strong of limb, gentle of speech, and kind in heart. He helped his father gather wood, carrying loads far greater than his age should allow. He helped his mother with the washing, his hands quick and cheerful as he splashed water upon the stones. Villagers marveled at him, saying the boy had been sent from heaven, for his presence brought good harvests and calm days. Yet within him stirred not only kindness but courage, for he could not bear to hear of suffering without wishing to end it. At that time, the people spoke in fear of a far-off island, where Oni, demons with horns and iron clubs, made their dwelling. From their fortress they sailed forth to plunder villages, carrying off treasures, rice, and sometimes even children. Smoke rose from their island, and their laughter echoed across the sea like thunder. Villagers trembled at the mention of their name. Momotaro, upon hearing of these cruelties, resolved to act. Though only a boy, he declared to his parents, "I will go to Onigashima, the island of demons, and free the people from their torment." His parents, fearful, tried to dissuade him, but his resolve did not waver. Seeing his determination, the old woman prepared for him millet dumplings, kibidango, small round cakes of grain, said to give strength beyond measure. She tied them in a pouch at his side and blessed his journey. The old man gave him a sturdy staff. With these simple gifts, Momotaro set out, his steps light upon the road, his heart steady as a drumbeat. As he walked, he met a dog upon the path. The animal bared its teeth at first, but Momotaro spoke gently, offering a dumpling from his pouch. The dog sniffed, then wagged its tail, bowing low in gratitude. "Where do you go, boy of the peach?" it asked. Momotaro answered, "I go to Onigashima to fight the demons." The dog's eyes shone with loyalty. "Then I will go with you," it said. Together they walked on. Further along they met a monkey chattering from the branches. Agile and mischievous, it eyed Momotaro's pouch with interest. He laughed and tossed it a dumpling, which the monkey caught with delight. "Where are you bound, boy of the peach?" it asked. Momotaro answered, "To Onigashima, to defeat the Oni." The monkey swung down, grinning. "Then I too shall come." At last, a pheasant descended from the sky, its feathers gleaming in the sunlight. It landed gracefully before Momotaro, cocked its head, and asked, "Where does your path lead?" Again Momotaro replied, "To the island of demons, where evil must be undone." The pheasant stretched its wings proudly. "I will fly before you, and together we shall triumph." And so the boy walked on with 3 companions, dog, monkey, and pheasant, each bound not by command, but by friendship and the gift of simple food. They reached the sea. Waves broke white upon the shore, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A boat waited, simple but sturdy. They set out together, the pheasant flying ahead to scout, the monkey clinging to the mast, the dog standing watch at the bow. The journey was long, the sea restless, but their spirits did not falter. At last the island rose before them, its cliffs jagged, its fortress of Oni looming black against the sky. Smoke curled from its towers, and the sound of cruel laughter carried across the waves. The battle was fierce. The pheasant darted through the air, pecking at the eyes of the Oni archers. The monkey clambered over the walls, pulling down ladders and scattering defenders. The dog leapt upon the demons with bared fangs, his loyalty unshaken, and Momotaro, though only a boy, fought with the strength of 10 men, his staff striking like thunder, his heart fearless. One by one, the Oni fell. Their clubs clattered upon the stones, their roars faded into cries of defeat. At last their leader, a giant horned demon, bowed in surrender, his strength broken. From the fortress, Momotaro and his companions carried back treasures, rice, silk, gold, and the children the demons had stolen. The villagers rejoiced, their fear lifted, their homes safe once more. They hailed Momotaro not only as a hero, but as proof that purity and courage can triumph even against monstrous strength. Momotaro returned to his parents, who wept with joy at his safe return. The peach that had once drifted down the river had carried not just a child, but a savior for many. His story passed from village to village, from hearth to hearth, told to children as they drifted to sleep, a reminder that bravery can dwell in the humblest of homes, and that even one born from fruit can embody the best of humanity. Thus Momotaro's tale endures. He's not remembered for treasures kept, but for the innocence that gave him courage, the kindness that won him companions, and the purity that guided his hand. He is the archetypal hero of Japan, simple, profound, and beloved, a boy whose laughter once rang in a thatched hut, and whose bravery lit the way for all who came after. Along the quiet shores of a fishing village, there lived a young man named Urashima Tarō. His hut stood close to the sea, where gulls wheeled and the tide lapped against stones smoothed by centuries. Each morning he cast his net into the surf. Each evening he carried home fish enough for his mother and father. He was known among his neighbors for kindness, his heart gentle as the waves at dawn. Though he lived simply, his eyes often drifted toward the horizon, as though the sea whispered secrets meant only for him. One day, walking along the strand, he saw children gathered in cruel laughter. At their feet a small turtle flailed helplessly, its shell scored where sharp sticks had struck. Urashima rushed forward, scattering the children with sharp words. He lifted the turtle carefully, brushing sand from its shell, and carried it to the water. "Go," he murmured, setting it upon the waves. "The sea is your home." The creature bobbed once, then swam away into the deep. Urashima thought no more of it, save for the warmth that lingered in his chest. That night, as the tide swelled beneath a rising moon, he took his boat out upon the calm sea. The stars shone like scattered silver, and the net sank with a soft hiss. Then from the dark water, the turtle rose again, yet now it was larger, its shell gleaming like jade, its eyes bright with intelligence. To Urashima's astonishment, it spoke. "Kind fisherman," it said, "I am the very creature you saved. My master, Ryujin, Dragon King of the Sea, has heard of your compassion. He invites you to his palace beneath the waves." Before Urashima could answer, the turtle dipped its head as if bowing. Wonder stirred in his heart, and with no thought of fear, he climbed upon its broad back. Down they plunged, through layers of sea. The water closed above him, yet he did not drown. A bubble of breath encased him, warm and protective. Around him darted schools of silver fish, their scales flashing like mirrors. Forests of kelp waved like banners, and strange creatures swam past, their shapes glimmering in colors no artist could capture. He felt as though he drifted through a dream woven from the threads of another world. At last, the turtle bore him to a gate wrought from coral and pearl. Beyond it rose the dragon palace, Ryugu-jo, its towers gleaming as though carved from jewels, its roofs tiled in mother of pearl that shimmered with every color of dawn. Lanterns of fishlight glowed along its halls, casting soft radiance upon the sea floor. Servants of the Dragon King, half human, half fish, moved with grace, their garments woven from seaweed and shells that sparkled like treasure. Urashima stepped inside, and wonder filled him as though his heart had grown too large for his chest. There he was welcomed by a maiden of surpassing beauty, Otohime, daughter of Ryujin. Her hair flowed like dark silk through the water, her eyes deep as the ocean's floor. She smiled upon him and said, "Brave fisherman who showed kindness to the lowly, you are honored here." She led him through halls where music flowed like currents, where dances drifted like seagrasses, where tables bore foods richer than any land could offer. Each day was a festival, each night a dream. Urashima's heart grew light, and in Otohime's presence, he felt joy beyond any he had known. Time passed strangely beneath the waves. Days melted into one another, indistinguishable, like pearls on a single string. Urashima wandered gardens of coral where fish swam like living jewels. He watched turtles older than centuries drift past like shadows of time. He learned songs sung by whales. He tasted fruits that glowed with inner light. In the embrace of Otohime and the beauty of Ryugu-jo, sorrow seemed banished forever. Yet even in paradise memory endures. At last Urashima felt the tug of longing, for the village he had left, for the parents who might wonder where he had gone, for the shore where he had cast his nets. With gentle sorrow he told Otohime of his wish to return. Her eyes clouded, though her smile did not fade. She placed in his hands a lacquered box tied with a silken cord. "This is the tamatebako," she said softly. "Carry it with you always. It will guard your fortune. But promise me one thing, never open it. No matter what you feel, no matter what you see, keep it closed." Urashima swore as she asked, though a shadow of unease touched his heart. Once more he rode upon the turtle's back, rising through the deep. The sea parted, and he stepped again upon the shore of his homeland. But something was wrong. The beach was unfamiliar. The houses had changed. The fields were strange. He sought his own village, but where his home had stood, he found only weeds. No face knew his. No voice spoke his name. At last he learned the truth. Though he had thought he spent only days beneath the sea, centuries had passed upon the earth. His parents were long gone, his people dust, his world lost. Despair broke him. He remembered the box. Perhaps within it lay a way back, a charm against time's cruelty. With trembling hands he untied the cord, though he recalled Otohime's warning. He lifted the lid. At once a pale mist rose, curling like smoke. It wrapped around him, cool and inexorable, his skin shriveled, his hair whitened, his back bent. Centuries crashed down upon him in an instant. He fell to the earth, an old man with nothing but sorrow. Then the last of the mist fled skyward, and Urashima Tarō crumbled into dust. The box lay empty upon the ground, gleaming faintly in the sun. Some say the mist was his own years, stored away until he broke his vow. Others say it was the breath of the sea itself, reclaiming him for Otohimi's palace. But all agree on the lesson. Time cannot be escaped, and paradise cannot be held. What is given in kindness may be lost in longing. Thus the tale of Urashima Tarō lingers. Children hear it at night and feel both wonder and unease. Fishermen speak of him when waves glitter strangely at dusk. The sea remembers him in its sighing, and the shore remembers him in its silence. His is a story of beauty and loss, of the dream that slips from one's grasp, leaving only the echo of what once was. And in that echo lives the truth of all things. Nothing endures forever, not even joy beneath the waves. In a valley where bamboo rose in green colonnades and cicadas stitched the noon with their steady song, an old cutter walked the same path he had known since youth. His hands were nicked by years of work, his back bowed like a branch in winter, yet his eyes were gentle. Each morning he entered the grove before dawn, and each evening he returned to a hut of clean tatami, and a hearth that sighed like a sleeping animal. He and his wife had grown old together without a child, and in that absence lay a quiet ache. Neither spoke aloud. The grove, however, held its own kindness, and on a day like any other, it offered him a wonder. He slipped his knife beneath a stalk, whose skin shone faintly with its own light. When the blade parted the green, the culm's hollow did not offer water or pith, but a glow as soft as a lantern beneath silk. Within, small as a curled petal, lay a child. She smiled up at him, and the grove stilled, as though wind had put its finger to its lips. He gathered her into his sleeves with hands that trembled and carried her home. His wife, seeing the tiny face, cried out as if a long-closed door had opened. They named her Kaguya, Princess of Radiance, and placed her in a basket lined with cotton so fine it sighed under her weight. From that night, fortune reached toward their threshold. Each culm the old man cut poured out grains of gold dust. Each knot revealed a nugget bright as dawn. They used none for vanity. A better roof, a warmer robe, a bowl that did not crack. The wealth went only so far as comfort asked. The little princess grew with a speed that bewildered neighbors. From infant to child in a handful of moons, from child to maiden in a single turning of the seasons. Her hair fell like nighttime to her waist. Her laughter lifted like bells. Her silence made even crickets hush. Songs traveled ahead of her to places she had never been, and suitors began to arrive like migrating birds. The old couple kept their gate closed as long as they could, but word running along roads is a tide. One morning, the lane outside their house filled with palanquins and banners, lacquered crests glinting between the bamboo shadows. 5 great nobles came, each with the confidence of a man who had never been refused. They bowed to the foster parents, then turned their eyes toward the woven screen where Kaguya waited. Her voice came through the reed lattice, clear, gentle, and distant, as if carried from a higher air. She said she would not choose by flattery or rank. If any loved her truly, let him prove devotion by bringing a treasure that belonged only to stories. To the first she named a branch whose leaves were gold, and whose fruits were pearls, the jeweled bough of Horai, the island where immortals dine on dew. To the second she named the begging bowl used by the Buddha, worn to a soft shine by centuries of compassion. To the third she named a robe woven from the fur of the fire rat of the western deserts, proof against any flame. To the fourth she named the jewel that burns in the throat of a sea dragon, lit by the pulse of storms. To the fifth she named a shell born where swallows nest, finer than any pearl and given freely by no hand. Each man stiffened, but pride makes light of mountains until the first step. They departed with vows stitched in silk. Messengers ran. Ships were provisioned. Priests were consulted. Astrologers paid. The old couple, whose lives had once been measured in cords of cut bamboo, watched the pageant of ambition with a mixture of amazement and worry. Kaguya Hime moved through the house like a lamp behind paper, illuminating without touching, kind in her words, even kinder in her silences. When the moon grew large and poured milk onto the grove, her eyes seemed to fill with homesickness for a place she would not name. The first suitor returned bearing a branch crusted with gilt and studded with round white stones. He spoke of storms, strange islands, and hermits who traded for tears. The craftsman who had made it, however, lingered at the gate to collect his fee, unschooled in noble discretion. Kaguya Hime listened, lifted the branch, and watched a flake of gold fall where a real leaf should have breathed. She returned it gently. The road took the suitor away, lighter by coin and heavier by shame. The second suitor presented a bowl wrapped in brocade, thick as winter. When it was set down, its weight sang of worth. Yet when Kaguya Hime tipped it, the water within left a dull ring no ancient hand had polished. Monks from a nearby temple came quietly, traced the rim, and smiled with the grave kindness of men who have read a great many sutras. The bowl was fine, but it had not caught offerings in any age beyond this one. The suitor bowed until his crest touched the floor, and departed before his face could be studied. The third suitor sent for a robe said to be cut from the fire rat's fur. Servants brought it on a lacquered tray, its weave luminous, its pile soft as breath. A brazier was set in the garden. Kaguya Hime's foster father, humble hands clumsy with ceremony, lowered the edge of the garment toward the coals. Smoke licked it. Scorch crept like a rumour along the hem. True fire rat cloth had no memory of flame. The robe sagged, the weave darkened, and the suitor's confidence melted with it. He called for cool water and a quick palanquin. The fourth suitor took to sea under a square sail stitched with his seal. His letters, carried inland from ports, spoke of whales like mountains and storms that wrote their fierce script on the sky. Months later he staggered through the gate with a jewel cradled like a wound. Its light moved like a heartbeat. He told of a dragon whose roar sounded like caves collapsing. His men, however, murmured a different tale, of a merchant in a harbour far south who named a price, not a dragon. Kaguya Hime held the jewel toward the moon. It shone beautifully, then dulled. Sea light, not storm light. She thanked him for surviving the voyage, and asked him to carry that mercy home. The fifth suitor came last, smelling faintly of roofs and rafters. He placed upon the tatami a shell the size of a thumbnail, set in a box the size of a small temple. He said swallows had given it. Nets were too crude to catch favours. A boy from the eaves, dusty and unafraid, confessed that nest after nest had been raided, and that carpenters had been paid to carve a shell from mother of pearl so thin breath might shiver it. Kaguya Hime pressed a coin into the child's palm for honesty, and asked polite forgiveness from a man who had not asked it first. When he left, pride sat beside him, silent as a sheathed blade. The emperor himself heard the tale of the woman in the bamboo house, and came in secret one evening when the grove held the last heat of day. He did not come with challenges, only with a wish to see. They spoke across a screen as is proper, and then, with ceremony, the screen was lifted. The emperor saw her and forgot half the cleverness that had brought him to the throne. He asked her to join him at court. She lowered her eyes, grateful and sorrowful in the same breath. She could not go, she said. Fate kept its hand upon her shoulder, and the hand meant to turn her away from every door men opened. He lingered as twilight gathered. They exchanged poems in which the reeds answered the river and the moon taught paper how to glow. He departed with dignity, understanding that power has no meaning if it cannot be gentle in the face of mystery. As the summer waned, Kaguya Haime's sadness ripened. On nights when the moon was thin, her joy returned like a glass of cool water. On nights when it was round and brilliant, she sat without speaking, and tears made small clear circles on her sleeve. At last, when the old couple begged for truth, she told them. She was not of this world. Long ago, she had been sent from the moon to dwell among humans for a fixed span, as a dewdrop sent to rest a while upon grass. The day of return drew near. No duty, no love, could knot her to the earth beyond that hour. The emperor, told what awaited, placed guards about the house, archers under the eaves, men sworn to hold back anything that floated by night. Banners bristled between the bamboo trunks like a second grove. On the appointed evening, a radiance descended without sound. It was neither flame nor lightning, but a light that taught all other lights to bow. Beings clothed in that glow arrived as softly as mist. The guard captain found his bow become a reed. The bravest men found their courage listening rather than standing. The leader of the moonfolk unrolled a letter written in strokes that looked like frost on glass. It named the hour, the reason, the mercy in the borrowing, and the mercy in the return. Kaguya Haime knelt before the foster parents who had washed her hair and warmed her hands on winter mornings. She placed her forehead upon the tatami and spoke thanks, made of more breath than words. She asked forgiveness for the grief that would follow the radiance she could not refuse. The old woman clung to her sleeve like ivy to old wood. The old man lifted his palm and let it fall as if measuring something he could not count. She rose and turned to the emperor's messenger, who had come in his stead with a letter sealed in cinnabar, a last request that she remain, if any will could sway the sky. She touched the writing and smiled the way one smiles at a wind that will not change. The moonfolk brought garments light as memory, and placed on her shoulders a cloak whose coolness erased tears as easily as it erased attachment. Before the cloak closed around her like a season, she took from her sleeve a small vial, an elixir that ends endings. She sent it to the emperor with a poem that said more than it said. Life is dear because it finishes, and love is dear because it cannot keep. The palanquin of light rose, bearing her upward through bamboo tops that rattled like prayer beads, and the old couple watched until the radiance thinned into ordinary night. The emperor read the poem in a chamber quiet enough to hear the brush of moths against screens. He held the vial, weighed its brightness, and felt the tug it made upon fear. He thought of a love he had not touched, and a choice he still could. He ordered a journey to the mountain where the sky leans close, Fuji, the peak that keeps the horizon in order. On the summit, his men built a fire from wood that had never known an axe's anger, and he consigned the flask to the flames. Smoke rose white into the blue, a thread stitching earth to sky. Those who stood near said the smoke tasted faintly of sweetness as it passed. In the bamboo house, the seasons continued in their patient rounds. The old couple learned to live again in rooms now larger than they had been. They set a small screen where she had once sat, and spoke to it softly when evening grew too long. Sometimes, when the moon was thin, they felt as if footsteps approached. Sometimes, when the moon was full, they stepped outside and let its cold blessing wash their faces. In the capital, people said the mountain smoked, because a letter is never fully read until it is burned. In villages, children learned that longing shines and burns in equal measure. So the tale of Kaguya lingers like moonlight left on the floor after a cloud moves on. A cutter found a princess in a stalk and brought her home. Suitors came with promises in boxes and returned with lessons wrapped in quiet. An emperor loved with the restraint that keeps a poem alive. A daughter of another world walked for a while among mortals and taught them how to lose without wasting what was given. From her hand fell no ring, only reflection. From her leaving rose no bitterness, only a mountain's patient smoke. And from her name, which means radiance, gleams the truth the night keeps teaching. Beauty visits, never stays. Joy arrives, then asks to be remembered. The heart opens and must let go. And in the letting go, it learns how to shine. In the old tales of the archipelago, fear wears a body. It trudges out of blizzards and mountain fogs on legs thick as tree trunks, shoulders hunched beneath pelts, skin stained red or blue as if anger itself had pigment. Horns curve from its brow, fangs push through its lips. In its hands lies an iron club, pitted and black, a tool that breaks doors as easily as bones. This is the Oni, ogre, plague-bearer, disturber of sleep. When storms ruin the harvest, when a cough spreads from house to house, when violence stalks the road at dusk, the people whisper that an Oni has passed. Oni haunt the edges of things, bridges where water mutters, mountain passes where wind snatches breath, ruins where ivy hides old fires. They love winter's lean months and the last mile before a traveller reaches a gate. Masks carved for festivals borrow their faces, wide eyes, tusks, wild hair, so that laughter can keep watch where terror once sat. At household thresholds beans are thrown with a shout that clears the air. Oni out, fortune in. A handful of grain becomes a charm. A ritual becomes a fence of sound. In this way, fear is coaxed away from the door and given a story to live in. There are Oni who steal cattle, Oni who drink lamps dry, Oni who stalk dreams with the weight of iron. Some rule bands of lesser ogres, some wander alone with a sake gourd and a hunger that never finishes. Priests write sutras on slips of wood and wedge them into lintels. Mothers tie cord around children's wrists and teach the knot that asks heaven to look twice. The tales say Oni love the smell of panic and the ease of darkness. They vanish when courage steadies a breath, when a door is barred, when a bell rings from a temple roof at first light. In the age when Kyoto's avenues ran straight as strings on a court musician's lute, rumors gathered like crows on the eaves. Maidens vanished at dusk. Carts returned overturned. Watchmen were found with helmets split like gourds. The whispers named a lord of ogres, Shuten Doji, the drunken boy, who had raised a stronghold in the hills of O north of the capital. He sent raiding parties down from the ridges and carried silk and sake and frightened girls back to a hall smoky with torchlight. At night, winds from the mountains brought the reek of his banquets, blood and liquor and the sourness of unwashed iron. The emperor called for Minamoto, no Raikō, a warrior whose blade was said to find the seam in any armor. With him stood his 4 companions, Watanabe no Tsuna, Sakata no Kintoki, Urabe no Suetake, Usui Sadamitsu, each sworn, each watchful. Some tell that Abe no Saimai, the Onmyoji, read the stars and muttered protections. Shrine bells sounded, prayers wrapped the men like invisible mail. From the gods they received an enchanted sake that undid poison and a cord no Oni could break. They dressed as travelling ascetics, faces shaded beneath black hoods, staves in hand, and took to the mountain paths where even foxes thread carefully. The road to Oe wound through cedar that swallowed sound. Streams crossed it like loose threads. At a wayside shrine they laid offerings of rice and salt, and touched their brows to stone. When the path narrowed, they walked single file, and when it opened to a ledge, they watched ravens lift slowly into a white sky. By dusk they saw it, palisades like jagged teeth, smoke dragging its grey tail across the pines, watchfires that burned with a sickly hue. Laughter welled from within, too many throats at once, the mirth of creatures amused by harm. The disguised warriors asked for shelter as holy men. Oni, fond of blasphemy, welcomed them with roaring hospitality. They were led into a hall where chains hung as decorations and skulls were piled like festival drums. Servants with claws for fingers brought platters that should not have been food. At the far end, on a dais made from timbers stolen from shrines, slouched Shuten Doji. His hair spilled in matted waves, horns thrust from a brow the colour of old cinnabar. In his fist was an iron cup, and with each swallow his eyes brightened further, as if liquor polished something terrible inside. He jested with his captains, and boasted to his captives. He asked the monks to drink. Raikō bowed and offered the sacred sake he carried, pouring with the reverence of a man who has served at altars. Shuten Doji laughed and drank and shivered with delight. He demanded more. His tongue thickened, his boasts lengthened, his head nodded heavy as a bell. The hall's heat rose, torches guttered. Somewhere down a corridor a chain rattled in a pattern that sounded like prayer. When the Ogre King slumped to one side, Raikō signaled. The four braves moved quickly, their disguises falling from them like husks. The enchanted cord whipped around Shuten Doji's limbs. He opened one eye and smiled with such malice that the room seemed smaller. "Do you think rope can stay a mountain?" he murmured. Yet the knots held. The warriors breathed together, each finding the weight of his sword as if greeting an old friend. Raikō raised his blade, the steel said to carry a god's temper, and struck at the thick neck where the cords crossed. The head leapt from the body with a gout of steam. It did not die in the way human heads die. Its lips peeled back, and it flew at Raikō to bite the life from his face. The blow landed instead on a helmet blessed for this hour, teeth ringing against iron, fury made into music. Tsuna and Kentoki pinned the jaw with spear shafts while Suetake and Sadamitsu drove spikes through the temples. The body twitched once and became heavy as earth. Silence arrived like a guest who had walked a long road. Outside, the lesser Oni broke and scattered, their courage a thing borrowed from their master. Some were hunted through the trees, some fell on their knees and begged in voices too late to trust. The women chained in back chambers blinked into torchlight, wrists numb, fear moving out of them slowly like a tide. One, steadier than the rest, pointed to a locked coffer, where the ogres kept the combs and rings of the missing. The warriors filled baskets with proofs the city would recognize, and covered the dead with cloaks cut from temple curtains, taken in raids long past. The head of Shuten Doji was caged and borne down the mountain. It stared as if the world should still obey it. In Kyoto, the court gathered to see the end of a rumor that had once seemed larger than walls. Priests chanted until breath steamed. The cage was set upon the stones. The head's eyes dimmed as dawn reached the eaves. Raikō laid his sword across the bars and bowed. The Emperor's messenger spoke thanks in words that had been kept ready for months. Somewhere, a bell took a long time to finish ringing. In the years that followed, names knitted themselves to the tale. Ibaraki Doji, the fierce retainer whose armed Suna cut at Rashomon. gourds that caught rivers dry, sutras that burned cold blue when an oni neared. Children learned these things the way they learned to balance on levees. The lesson was simple and necessary. When fear is a fog, it wets everything. When fear is an ogre with horns and a club, it can be watched, tracked, and met. Beans thrown at thresholds, drums beaten at setsubun, masks grinned through in parades. Each act gives the shapeless a shape and the dangerous a distance. And so oni remain in the stories, embodiments of plague and rage, and the pleasure taken in wrecking what others build. They still wander mountain festivals in shaggy suits that smell of straw, roaring for effect while children shriek and then laugh from behind a parent's sleeve. The iron club still gleams in carvings. The horns still catch light on painted screens. In quiet houses after midnight, the old dread still sits up and listens for a step outside. Then a bean hits a tatami. A bell answers from a distant roof, and the door's frame remembers how to be strong. The monster has been seen. The fear has a name. The night is once again a place where sleep can safely fall. In the hush of the fields at twilight, when the rice heads bend under the weight of ripening grain, and fireflies lift their brief lanterns above the paddies, stories whisper of foxes. Their eyes glimmer from the edge of the path, bright as coals half buried in ash. Their tails brush the grass like brushes dipped in shadow. In the old tales, these are not mere animals. They are Kitsune, spirits wearing fur by day and human skin by night, shapeshifters who walk the narrow boundary between mischief and devotion. They are clever, beautiful, unpredictable, and always watching. The people believed foxes carried the power of enchantment, and the more tails they bore, the greater their wisdom. A fox of 9 tails was said to have lived for centuries, its cunning sharpened into something almost divine. To meet such a being at dusk was to feel one's certainty unravel. Was that a woman with hair long as waterfall silk, or a fox whose eyes gleamed through the disguise? The rustle in the bamboo, the laughter just beyond the threshold. Such things made neighbors cross themselves and light another stick of incense. For Kitsune wore masks of tenderness and trickery both, and no man knew which he would be offered. Yet foxes were not merely wandering spirits. They were bound to Inari, god of rice and prosperity, whose shrines gleam with vermilion gates across Japan. Stone foxes guard the entrances, their mouths holding keys or jewels, their faces sharp with alertness. To serve Inari was to serve the people, for rice was life, and those who watched the granaries watched the heart of the land. Farmers left offerings of fried tofu, said to be the fox's delight, and in return hoped for protection from famine and thieves. Thus the Kitsune carried both the air of trickster and of sacred messenger, walking 2 paths at once. Tales abound of foxes who wore the shape of women and married mortal men. In one story, a farmer found a maiden lost near his field. Her beauty was quiet, her voice low, and he welcomed her to his home. She became his wife, bore him children, and brought prosperity to his household. Yet one day, while she slept, a neighbor glimpsed her true form curled upon the tatami, a fox with golden fur, her tails folded neatly about her. When she woke, she wept, for the spell was broken. "I must go," she said, "but I will watch our children from afar." She vanished into the forest, yet the children thrived, and their laughter always seemed to echo faintly with fox song. Other tales tell of Kitsune, whose devotion outshone even human fidelity. A man once saved a fox from hunters, binding its wounded leg. Years later, when the man lay dying, a woman appeared at his side, nursing him with herbs and care. She confessed herself to be the same fox, come to repay her debt. She remained until his last breath, then disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a single tail hair glowing faintly in the lamplight. Such stories remind listeners that gratitude can endure even beyond the boundaries of species, and that devotion wears many forms. Yet for every tender tale there is another of mischief. Kitsune delight in leading travelers astray, spinning illusions that make one road look like another, or filling the night with phantom fires that flicker just out of reach. They slip into households and whisper lies that unravel friendships, or borrow the faces of neighbors to play tricks that end in laughter or sorrow. Men who boasted of their wisdom were humbled. Women who mocked the poor found their treasures turned to leaves. In this way, foxes became teachers through embarrassment, sharpening the prideful by catching them off guard. Some stories darken further, telling of foxes who delight in possession, slipping into the hearts of the vulnerable and speaking with voices not their own. Priests would be summoned to drive them out, chanting sutras until the afflicted shook and shrieked, and at last fell silent, the fox spirit departing like smoke through a shutter. These tales gave shape to madness and misfortune, yet also offered a cure. If words could send the fox away, then even chaos could be named, battled and eased. The duality of Kitsune, devoted wife and deceiving trickster, loyal companion and cruel illusionist, mirrors the ambiguity of the world itself. Just as rice may bring feasting or famine, just as rain may bless or ruin, so too the fox embodies blessing and danger. They walk beside the god Inari, yet also dart laughing through the moonlit fields. To see one at the crossroads of night is to be reminded that life is never entirely safe, nor entirely cruel. Inari's shrines keep this memory alive. Visitors still tie prayers to the gates, hoping for fortune in harvest or trade. Stone foxes stand watch, their eyes fixed on horizons where the living cannot see. And in stories told by grandparents, to children as lamps grow dim, the fox is never only one thing. It is the trickster who steals your way, and the lover who leaves you with children and a blessing. It is the spirit that mocks your pride, and the messenger who guards the rice in your bowl. In every guise, the Kitsune reminds us that devotion and deception are threads of the same fabric, woven into the heart of life itself. In the folds of Japan's mountains, where waterfalls plunge white into shadow and the air smells of damp stone, there are places villagers do not linger. Travelers speak of sudden silence there, as if the forest has paused its breathing. The cicadas stop, the brook hushes, and the wind folds its wings. Then from the shade she appears, a woman of rare beauty, her robe clinging like mist, her smile shy yet knowing. She beckons the weary to follow. Few refuse, fewer return. They call her Jorōgumo, the spider bride. By day she wears the face of a maiden, her hair dark as lacquer, her eyes soft as autumn dusk. She moves with grace enough to make warriors forget their vows and monks forget their sutras. But beneath the silk of her sleeves and the pale curve of her cheek waits another truth. A spider's body vast and patient, fangs sharp as awls, a hunger spun into threads older than memory. Her beauty is lure, her kindness a snare. The tales say she lives in crumbling huts where moss swallows the roof, or by streams where roots reach into the water like pale fingers. A traveller, lost or tired, finds her seated at the threshold. She offers tea, her hands delicate, her voice low. The guest, lulled, does not see the threads glistening along the beams, fine as hair, catching light only when the lamp flares. He does not hear the slow tightening, the faint creak as strands draw taut around him. By the time suspicion pricks, he is already bound. Those who claim to have witnessed her feeding speak of the stillness before it begins. The victim, caught in silk, lies wide-eyed, lips parted to shout. But the shout never comes. The forest itself seems to lean inward, holding its breath. Then the faint pluck of threads sounds like a koto string drawn too tight. Jorōgumo bends over her prey, her face still beautiful, her mouth now parted by fangs. A sigh escapes the captive as venom enters, and the silence deepens, thick as sleep. By dawn only husks remain, pale and empty, wrapped neatly as offerings. Yet not all her stories end in screams. Some speak of men who lived with her in bliss for seasons, kept warm in her arms, lulled by her whispers. They did not see the web until the day her hunger overcame her patience. Others tell of youths who chased her beauty, thinking it love, and were never found again. The lesson does not shift. Desire blinds, beauty deceives, and longing can tangle even the wisest into cords too strong to break. Temples raised in spider-haunted valleys ring their bells longer at dusk. Villagers burn incense at crossroads, where silk threads shine in moonlight, murmuring prayers that the spider bride pass them by. Children are warned not to follow strange voices in lonely places, nor to linger when the forest grows suddenly still. For the Jorōgumo waits not with rage, but with patience, weaving her web thread by thread, century by century. And those who forget the danger of beauty may find themselves one night listening to the faint music of silk tightening, the last sound they will ever hear. On slopes where cedars shoulder the sky and ravens sketch black runes against evening, there is a presence that belongs to neither village nor court. Leaves rattle, though no foot passes. Pine resin warms in the last light, and the wind carries a dry, feathery whisper. Then a figure stands upon the ridge, part man, part bird, cloak like folded wings, face sharp as a beak or long-nosed like the masks worn by mountain ascetics. Eyes reflect the peaks as if they were lit from within. A staff taps once upon stone. The forest holds still, measuring the weight of the visitor. This is a Tengu, the mountain's own thought-given body. Old storytellers speak of two faces for the same spirit. Some Tengu wear the shape of great crows, feathers black as wet ink, hands ending in talons, voices like flutes carved from bone. Others take the long-nosed countenance of Yamabushi, the rugged monks who train where snow deepens and roads end. Both carry fans woven from broad leaves or feathers, tools that can stir sudden wind, turn arrows aside, or slap a boast out of a man's mouth. A short sword rides at the hip, a smirk rides the lip. Tengu are teachers and tempests. They test what stands too proud. They belong to the green altars of the world, the cliff that refuses a stare, the gorge that swallows speech, the path that decides it will be a river today. In such places a lord's banner means little. A decree loses its breath. Tengu attend to arrogance by bringing it to ground. A magistrate's palanquin tips. A hunter's shaft curves back into the quiver it came from. Children claim they have seen footprints on bark far above their heads. Each print set at angles no human ankle would endure. Laughter follows these tales, edged by a nervous glance upslope. Monks know that the mountain corrects without anger. A novice who climbs with eyes fixed on glory finds his steps wandering in circles. The sutras he wished to recite escape him as if lifted by a draught. Then at the turn of a switchback, a stranger stands waiting, robes dusty, staff in hand, eyebrows like bristled wings. Questions arrive in odd order. Which is truer, the wind or the tree it moves? Where does a prayer land if the valley is empty? The novice answers poorly, for his heart beats too fast. The stranger smiles and vanishes, leaving only a small fan fallen in the trail and a lesson that will take years to learn. Warriors tell of training sessions that began as disasters. A swordsman, full of his own fame, camped beneath a jut of rock and boasted to the moon that he was ready for any challenge. The night thinned and became a pale blue morning, and a shadow dropped from a branch without a sound. Feathers rustled. The visitor bowed with perfect courtesy and attacked without warning. Blows landed where there had been space. Feathers brushed the swordsman's eyelids as the fan redirected his strike into empty air. By noon the braggart had learned a different rhythm, steps as light as bird prints on snow, breath moving before the blade, eyes on the horizon instead of the tip of his pride. On Kurama's steep paths, north of the capital, people swear that a child once learned from these spirits, his name a whisper that grew into history's shout. He climbed at dusk, when temple bells smudged the light and practiced by moon-bleached roots. The Tengu taught him to jump as wind does, to cut where the world already means to open, to step between beats of a drum so the blow arrives in the silence. In the morning he looked like any boy with a wooden sword. At night he learned a grammar only mountains speak. Years later his cuts would write sentences other men could read only once. Yet Tengu do more than sharpen steel. They steal away children for an hour or a season, returning them altered, quiet where they had been noisy, swift where their steps had dragged. A flute appears in small hands, and plays tunes no one taught. A carpenter wakes with a new way to join beams, so the roof rides storms like a ship rides waves. The village shakes its head and says the mountain borrowed what it needed, then set things back down, with a gift tucked into the returning. Priests debate whether Tengu are demons or guardians. Scrolls accuse them of leading ascetics astray with illusions, stairways that climb into cloud and never stop. Maidens who carry trays of sake along paths where no footprints remain. Other scrolls praise them as wardens who thrash bandits, scatter poachers, and knock hats from heads too high. Both are true in their season. A Tengu's justice is older than law, closer to the grain of wood and the fall of water. Mercy and mockery share a face when the forest is judge. They hate boasting. A warlord ascending with drums and flags finds his retinue in a tangle before noon, horses skittering, banners whipping backward, the drumskins split by unseen claws. He will return to the city muttering that the air itself was disloyal. In truth, the air chose its elders. Meanwhile, a pilgrim who walks alone, steady and small, receives a breeze that parts gnats from his eyes, and a raven's call that sounds like encouragement. The same wind, 2 sentences. Festivals wear their faces so people can laugh at power without breaking it. Long-nosed masks grin above red robes. Children tug at sleeves and point. Drums tumble a rhythm that the body knows how to answer. At shrine gates stacked in vermilion, offerings pile, rice, sake, a fan made from cypress slats. The elders smile at the mischief and bow to the guardians in the same gesture. After dusk, the mountains reclaim their shapes, and the masks hang quietly in storerooms, but the lesson remains in the feet. Step lightly, speak only as loudly as the trees can bear. Some nights, Tengu visit dreams. A monk wakes with the taste of cold iron and sap on his tongue, and remembers an argument with a bird that used his own voice to defeat him. A woodcutter wakes knowing the exact weight of a new axe he has never held. A widow wakes to find the shutters latched from outside, as if a courteous guest closed the night for her. Dreams do their work without needing proof. In the morning, the world fits differently. The door opens to a trail that was not there yesterday. If a traveller must cross a range alone, he can bargain with the silence. He can promise to leave no mark deeper than rain will forgive, to fold his trash inside his coat, to speak to the ridge the way one speaks to a quiet elder. If the promise holds, the gusts soften and the ravens do not argue. If he breaks faith, laughter crackles in the switchbacks and the compass needle points toward lessons. Respect is the toll the mountains take, and Tengu are the collectors who do not count coins. In the end, their nature remains a riddle the forests enjoy. They train the hand that would otherwise harm. They shame the mouth that would speak too high. They bruise the ankle that would step on a root and call the tree an enemy. A Tengu can feel cruel when it blocks the path, and blessed when it moves the storm aside so a candle survives. Demon or guardian depends on the shape of the heart that meets them. When the wind crosses a saddle and the pines answer like strings, when a shadow glides where no bird flies, remember the old advice: bow to the ridge, set down your pride, pick up your breath. The mountains will decide the rest. In winters when the pines wear armor of rime, and the world narrows to white and breath, villagers speak of a woman who walks where roads vanish. She is pale as the moon seen through gauze, hair long and black as wet ink, robe the color of new snow. She leaves no footprint. Sometimes she's only a drift that moves against the wind. Sometimes a figure at the window, a thin hand on the paper screen. Her eyes are not cruel, only very far away, as if they look past the living into a silence deeper than mountains. When she exhales, frost flowers bloom along eaves, and the lantern flame bows once as though in courtesy. They call her Yuki-onna, the snow woman, winter gathered into a body and given the patience of ice. One tale begins in a woodcutter's hut, boards trembling as the storm shouldered the walls. An old man and his apprentice had lost the trail and crawled inside with a bundle of sticks and a single coal glowing like a heart. Near midnight, the door slid open without sound. Cold entered first, then a white mist took shape beside the pallets. The old man's lashes frosted in an instant. A woman bent over him, breath spilling like milky smoke. He sighed once and stiffened. His heat lifted away as easily as steam from rice. The apprentice lay rigid, watching frost write delicate script across the beam. The snow woman turned her face to him. "You are young," she said in a voice that seemed to come from the snow itself. "You will live, if you tell no one you saw me." He nodded and the pale figure thinned into drifting flakes. By morning the hut was quiet, the old man light as dry wood, the boy's secret heavy as a stone. In other valleys they say she walks river ice searching for careless footsteps, that she leans to kiss travelers and leaves them shining like glass, beautiful and perfectly still. Yet the snow woman is not always mercy's enemy. Another version follows the apprentice down from the mountain into years that softened his fear. In spring he met a stranger by the bridge. O Yuki, a woman with a face like cool water and a smile that calmed the air. She became his wife. Their house knew gentle winters. Drifts fell tidily from the eaves. Roofs held, the well never sealed. She wove cloth white as frost and raised children, whose hands were always a little cool, but quick at kindness. Only once did she press a finger to his lips and ask that certain nights be left unspoken. Time moved, as it does on silent feet. Then, one evening of snow, he told the story of the hut, the breath, the promise, the old man rigid beneath its touch. The lamp went small. Oyuki's face whitened beyond flesh, her hair lengthened like unspooled ink, and the room filled with winter. "Foolish," she whispered, sorrow burning colder than anger. I spared you, and you tore the thread with your own mouth." She looked toward the sleeping children. "For them, I will not take your life, but I cannot stay." The door opened to no hand, and she was gone into the falling white. Some say a fine frost patterned the window each year on their birthdays, the delicate lacework of a mother's forgotten touch. Other tellings end harder. Where there are no children to soften her, the man's last breath rings like a thin bell of ice. The Snow Woman's stories carry the shape of winter's law, beauty that can kill by being beautiful, tenderness that lasts only while the promise holds. Priests tie red cords on roadside statues so the cold will pass them by. Mothers knit small caps for stone Jizo to keep the frost from the ears of travelers who never reached home. Men share flasks at pass gates and say each sip is a vow to return, each flame a contract with the dark. When blizzards erase the world, desire becomes dangerous, desire to keep walking when there is no path, to sleep just a moment, to speak a name that was meant to remain in the snow. Yuki-onna is the mercy that spares, and the breath that stops, the hand that shuts a door against the storm and the white face outside that asks to be let in. If you see her where the road becomes sky, bow, and keep your voice inside your coat. If she loves you, guard your promise like fire. If she turns away, do not follow. Only listen to the thin music on the eaves, ice forming, ice letting go. And remember what winter teaches, that longing is a cold as bright as stars, and that some beauties can be kept only by not touching them. In the twilight between myth and history, when gods had retreated to their shrines, but the land still trembled with monsters, warriors took the stage. Among them, none shines brighter in tale than Minamoto no Raikō, also called Yorimitsu, whose sword cut not only through flesh, but through fear itself. He lived when Kyoto was the beating heart of the realm, its palaces radiant by day, yet haunted by whispers at night. Beyond the lantern glow lay forests where shapes prowled, mountains where demons kept court, and roads where travelers vanished. Raikō became the blade of the capital, and his loyal band of 4 braves the edge of that blade. Raikō's companions were as storied as himself. Watanabe no Tsuna, fierce as steel fresh from the forge. Sakata no Kintoki, once a wild boy of the mountains whose strength could uproot trees. Urabe no Suetake, sharp-eyed and swift as an arrow in flight. And Usui Sadamitsu, loyal and clever with courage as steady as riverstone. Together they were called the Shitenno, the 4 heavenly kings. And when their banners rose, Kyoto breathed easier. To hear their names was to believe that even in a world still crowded with oni and ghosts, human valor had its place. Their most famous battle was against Shutendoji, the demon lord of Mount Oi, whose revels drowned the night in screams and drunken laughter. We have spoken of him already, the giant with hair like a burning banner, who drank rivers of sake and devoured captives in his hall of skulls. The emperor sent Raikō with his braves to end the terror. Disguised as wandering priests, armed with enchanted sake and cords that no demon could snap, they crept into the monster's lair. The Oni welcomed them with grotesque cheer, believing their own strength unchallengeable. But when Shutendoji was drunk and bound, Raikō's sword flashed. His head fell, yet even severed it bit at the warrior's helmet, proof that courage was needed even after victory. That head, carried back to Kyoto, became both trophy and warning. The mountain's laughter had been silenced, but not without cost. Yet Shutendoji was not the only shadow to test Raikō's steel. In the hills around Kyoto, travelers whispered of a Tsukuyomi, a monstrous earth spider whose body filled caverns and whose breath stank of centuries. It wove webs so vast they stretched across valleys, ropes of silk strong enough to snare an ox. Villagers disappeared. Soldiers sent to investigate returned babbling or never at all. At last, word reached Raikō. He was already weakened by illness when he resolved to face it, but duty burned brighter than fever. Sword in hand, he rode with Tsuna to the spider's lair. They found it not in open field, but in the heart of Kyoto itself, disguised as a phantom warrior. Raikō, resting in his chamber one night, was confronted by a monk of towering size, eyes red as coals. Weak though he was, Raikō drew his sword and struck. The figure shrieked, blood gushing black as ink, then fled through the shutters, leaving a trail into the mountains. Following, the warriors found a cavern thick with webs. Skeletons hung like grotesque fruit. At the center lay the true Tsukuyomi, its body swollen, its many eyes gleaming with hunger. Raikō and Tsuna cut their way through tangles of silk, the sound of snapping strands loud as breaking bones. The battle was long, the air cloying with poison, but at last the monster was slain, its carcass so vast that 300 men were needed to drag it from the cave. From its belly poured skulls of the devoured, each one a story silenced until the warriors' blades spoke for them. Other tales tell of Raikō's band battling phantoms at Rashomon, where a demon's arm was severed and hidden beneath the eaves of a shrine. Tsuna guarded it, but at night a beautiful woman came to borrow the arm, her tears convincing. When he relented, she revealed herself as the demon Ibaraki Doji and fled, arm restored. Still, the story lingered not as failure, but as proof of how cunning and persistence test courage as much as combat does. To face Oni was to face not only strength but deception, and the warriors learned vigilance that steel alone could not grant. In these stories, Raikō and his men stand between two worlds. They are not gods, though divine blessing arms them. They are not peasants, though they fight to guard their lives. They are warriors, mortals who stepped into the mythic spaces where Oni laughed, spiders spun, and demons plotted. Each victory was not only a rescue of Kyoto, but a reshaping of imagination. The people learned to believe that while fear may rise in monstrous form, courage too can walk with a human face. These demon-slaying epics mark the shift from the age of gods to the age of heroes. Izanagi's tears, Amaterasu's brilliance, Susanoo's fury, those belong to the dawn. Raikō's sword, Tsuna's loyalty, Kintoki's strength, these belong to a new age, when men bore the weight once carried by deities. The Oni still lurked, the Tsukuyomi still wove, but human arms learned to strike back. The capital's palaces gleamed not only because God smiled upon them, but because warriors stood guard in the night. To this day, kabuki plays and picture scrolls show Raikō and his companions battling demons, their faces painted with ferocity, their swords catching the torchlight. Children chant their names at festivals, their deeds half remembered but never forgotten. And in mountain villages where the wind rasps through bamboo, people still speak of a laugh heard too near at night, or a web glistening across the path at dawn. When they do, they remember Raikō and the demon slayers, whose courage bridged the world of spirits and the world of men, and whose stories carry the echo of steel striking against nightmare. From the moment Izanagi fled the caverns of Yomi, with the breath of death still clinging to his skin, Japan's stories carried the weight of questions that never leave a people. Where do we go when the body fails, and what waits beyond the threshold of the last breath? In that shadowy land where Izanami rotted and maggots crept through her divine flesh, death was not a kingdom of judgment or reward, but a place of stillness and impurity. Yomi, in its earliest telling, was neither punishment nor paradise. It was simply the shadow into which all footsteps eventually disappeared, a grey world where the dead lingered like husks, unable to return, unable to truly live. For the Shinto heart, this was terror enough, and purity became the shield against it. Ritual cleansing, washing in rivers, the sweeping of shrines, all sought to hold Yomi at bay, to keep death's pollution from seeping too close to the hearth. Yet Japan did not remain a land of one vision. With the arrival of Buddhism from the continent came other maps of the unseen, more intricate, more terrible, and more radiant. Sutras spoke of Jigoku, the hells, not a single shadowy plane, but countless fiery realms, stacked like the layers of a furnace. In these pits the wicked were boiled, flayed, crushed beneath mountains, or frozen in ice darker than midnight. Demons with iron claws tore flesh, rivers of blood carried away sinners. Each torment was tailored, as if the universe itself held a perfect memory of every cruelty. But unlike Yomi, hell was not eternal. The wheel of rebirth spun onward. One might suffer for ages, yet still rise again into another life, human or animal, higher or lower, shaped by karma's weight. Alongside these terrors gleamed promises. The pure land of Amida, the Buddha of infinite light, shone in the imagination as a realm of lotus ponds and jeweled towers, where suffering was unknown and every soul could hear the Dharma. Unlike the shadow of Yomi or the torments of Jigoku, the Pure Land offered comfort, a place where even the ordinary, the flawed, the grieving could be reborn, carried upon Amida's vow. To chant his name with sincerity, Namu Amida Butsu, was to step onto a path leading to that western paradise. It became the prayer of farmers bent over paddies, of mothers rocking children, of the aged gazing toward sunset. Where Shinto gave cleansing rituals and remembrance, Buddhism gave hope that suffering could be left behind altogether. In time these visions interwove, for Japan has always been a land where beliefs do not replace but braid together. A villager might pour water over a gravestone in Shinto reverence, then chant Amida's name for the soul's passage. A family might hang ropes of paper streamers to keep impurity at bay, while also donating rice to a temple to shorten a loved one's stay in Jigoku. The boundary between traditions blurred, and a unique tapestry formed. Death was impurity to be washed away, punishment to be feared, a cycle to be endured, and a chance for salvation. All these truths coexisted, not as contradictions, but as facets of the same mystery. Festivals reveal this weaving most clearly. During Obon, lanterns are lit to guide ancestral spirits home, for a time, from Yomi or beyond. Families clean graves, dance in circles, and offer food, not because they doubt the cycle of rebirth, but because memory itself is nourishment. In temples, monks chant of Amida's Pure Land, while in shrines priests clap and bow to keep the presence of death from growing too heavy. Even the fierce hell scrolls painted in lurid detail, bodies flayed, demons gloating, served not only to terrify, but to remind. Suffering is temporary, compassion endures. To see them was to feel fear, but also to recognize the possibility of change. The philosophies shaped not only ritual, but daily life. A farmer knew that impurity clung to death, so he purified his hands before entering a shrine. Yet he also knew that the soul wandered on, and so he offered prayers to ease its path. A warrior who killed in battle might fear Jigoku's torments, yet hope that Amida's compassion could still reach him. A mother who lost a child might imagine the little one wandering in Yomi's shadows, but also cradled in the Pure Land upon a lotus blossom. In such ways the Japanese heart bore many truths at once: fear of corruption, acceptance of impermanence, trust in compassion, and reverence for those who came before. Over centuries, priests and poets wove metaphors to make sense of the afterlife. Yomi was often likened to a cave forever moist with decay, Jigoku to furnaces beneath the mountains, where the screams of the condemned rose like smoke. The Pure Land was painted as a landscape of impossible beauty, lotus petals falling like snow that never melts, music floating from unseen strings. And the cycle of rebirth turned through all these, binding souls to the 6 realms, gods in their heavens, humans in their villages, animals in their forests and rivers, hungry ghosts starving on the margins, demons writhing in hells, and enlightened ones crossing beyond. Each path was both warning and promise, each turn of the wheel a reminder that nothing, neither joy nor pain, lasts forever. In this vision, death was not a single destination but a river with many currents. Some flowed to shadow, some to fire, some to lotus blossoms, yet all were part of the great sea of existence. What mattered was how one lived, the purity of hands washed before a shrine, the kindness in sharing rice with a stranger, the prayers whispered at sunset. These small acts wove protection against Yomi's chill, lessened the weight of Jigoku's punishments, and brightened the path toward Amida's Pure Land. The afterlife was vast and uncertain, but in the weave of rituals and compassion, people found a way to endure its mystery. And so, when the winds of autumn stir through temple bells, when lanterns float upon rivers like drifting souls, when incense curls in shrine courtyards, the old questions linger. Where do we go? What waits beyond? Japan's stories do not answer with one voice. They answer with shadows and fire, with lotus and wheel, with sorrow and celebration. They teach that death is impurity, punishment, renewal, and salvation all at once. And perhaps in this multitude lies the deepest truth, that the afterlife, like life itself, cannot be bound by a single path. It must be honored in ritual, feared in imagination, and embraced in hope. In the silence that follows these stories, as the listener lies beneath the weight of night, the heart understands what words cannot, that every ending is also a beginning, and every shadow carries the memory of light. Each summer, when the air hums with cicadas and the scent of ripening rice drifts from the fields, Japan pauses to welcome the unseen. Families prepare altars, sweep dust from ancestral graves, and hang lanterns at doorways. They say that during Obon, the festival of spirits, the boundary between living and dead thins like paper held to the light. For a handful of days, the departed return, not as ghosts to fear, but as honored guests. The land itself seems to breathe differently. Smoke from incense coils into the sky. The sound of wooden clogs beats across temple courtyards, and lanterns glow like patient stars waiting to guide loved ones home. The origins of Obon reach back more than 1,000 years, braided from Buddhist teachings and Shinto remembrance. Sutras tell of a disciple who sought to save his mother's tormented spirit, offering food and prayers to the monastic community. From this act grew a ritual of gratitude, a way to nourish not only the living but also those who had gone beyond. Shinto, with its reverence for ancestral spirits, added its voice, and together they formed a festival that speaks both of duty and of joy. In Obon's fires and dances, one can hear the echo of Yomi, the promise of Amida's Pure Land, and the heartbeat of the household altar, where family names are whispered in thanks. The days of Obon begin with welcome. Families light small fires called mukaebi at their gates, sparks crackling like a whispered invitation. Come back, the way is clear. In homes, the altars are dressed with flowers, offerings of rice, melons, and eggplants carved with legs of chopsticks. tiny animals said to carry spirits swiftly to and from the world of the living. The air grows thick with incense, its fragrance clinging to sleeves and hair. Children, taught by grandparents, learn to bow before the tablets of ancestors, their hands pressed in prayer. In that hush, one feels not absence but presence, as though the departed stand quietly in the room, smiling with patience. When night falls, the mood shifts. Lanterns sway along streets, their paper skins glowing red, white, or gold. Crowds gather in open squares, where the deep drums of taiko roll like thunder softened by joy. Dancers in yukata form circles, their steps measured and repeating, sleeves fluttering like wings. These are the bon odori, the dances of Obon. Each region has its own songs, some lively, some solemn, but all invite the dead to join in movement, to circle with the living one more time. Laughter rises, sandals slap the earth, and above the crowd the lanterns float like moons tethered to bamboo poles. On rivers and along coastlines, the farewell begins. Families set paper lanterns afloat upon the water, Toro Nagashi. Each carries a candle that trembles in the night air, then steadies as it drifts. The river becomes a mirror of stars, glowing with hundreds of tiny lights. People kneel at the banks, whispering names, watching until the flames fade into distance. It is said these lanterns guide the spirits back toward the other shore, a final gesture of love. For some, tears fall into the current. For others, smiles linger, for grief has been softened by the promise of reunion, however brief. Obon is not only a matter of ritual, but of atmosphere. The heat of midsummer presses close, yet the festival is filled with vitality. Fans wave in rhythm to songs, stalls sell sweets sticky with sugar, children chase one another between lines of lanterns. Amid the bustle lies something deeper, a recognition that life and death interlace. The same lantern that delights a child also guides a grandparent's spirit. The same drumbeat that drives the dance also calls the departed to step in time. Thus the festival becomes both carnival and memorial, joy and remembrance braided like red and white cords. In the countryside, fields glow faintly under the moon, fireflies flickering as if answering the lanterns of the villages. In the cities, skyscrapers mirror the festival's lights, and in narrow alleys, families still gather at altars as they did centuries ago. Time folds during Obon. A grandmother may speak of her father as if he had only just stepped out. A child may feel that the faces in the photographs are watching with affection. Myth and present coexist seamlessly. Amida's pure land is there in the chant, Yomi's shadow in the quiet fear of leaving lanterns unlit, and the fox-guarded shrines of Inari are alive with prayer for prosperous harvests to come. The festival closes with Okuribi, the sending fire. Large bonfires are lit upon hillsides, flames rising against the dark like beacons. In Kyoto, the mountains blaze with the giant character Dai, meaning great, written in fire. It is said these flames mark the spirit's departure, their way illuminated so they will not stumble. Villagers watch in silence as sparks drift upward, knowing their guests have left. The night grows ordinary again. The cicadas resume their endless song, and the world of the living folds back upon itself. Yet the memory of presence lingers, soft as the smoke that curls into the stars. Obon endures because it answers a need that no age can outgrow. It teaches that the dead are not gone, but woven into the rhythm of life. It reassures that sorrow can dance, that love can light a lantern, that memory can take the shape of water carrying fire into the night. In its mingling of Shinto reverence and Buddhist promise, of mythic imagination and homely ritual, Obon shows how Japan holds its past within its present. When the lanterns glow and the drums sound, the divide between living and dead softens into a circle of light and music. For a brief span, the ancestors come home, and in their company the living remember that they too are part of a story that does not end. Evening settles over the islands. The last cicadas loosen their grip on the air, and the forests breathe with the slow patience of cedar and pine. A breeze carries the faint clatter of a shrine bell, and smoke from an incense stick curls like a forgotten prayer into the dusk. Here, in this hush, one feels the weight of centuries. Gods who quarreled and wept, heroes who marched eastward, spirits who loved, deceived, and lingered. Their stories are not pressed between the covers of books alone. They walk still, quiet as dew on moss, patient as stones beside a stream. Japan is often called the eternal country of the gods, not because its myths are ancient alone, but because they breathe within its present. The rice fields bend under wind that feels like Inari's blessing. The mountains carry the echo of Tengu wings, mocking pride even as they guard. Lanterns on rivers guide not only spirits, but also the hearts of the living, who remember that every flame is both farewell and welcome. At shrines, hands are washed in running water, just as Izanagi once cleansed himself after Yomi, and in that gesture, the oldest story of all is told again without words. Children still laugh at tales of Momotaro, still glance nervously at rivers where Kappa might wait, still bow before the vermilion gates where foxes keep watch. Monks still chant the name of Amida, envisioning lotus petals falling like snow. Families still clean graves at Obon, waiting for ancestors to step briefly into the circle of the living. The myths have not vanished into the past. They lean like shadows into the light of today, coloring festivals, shaping rituals, dwelling in the pauses of ordinary life. To walk in Japan is to walk in a landscape where story and stone are never far apart. A torii gate stands in the surf, marking a threshold where sea and sky meet. A shrine crouches in a forest, its rope heavy with white paper streamers, its air sharp with cedar and silence. A temple bell tolls at dusk, and in its fading note, one hears both the sorrow of Yomi and the promise of the Pure Land. The sacred and the everyday remain entwined, as inseparable as the weave of silk. And so, the stories fade into stillness. The gods return to their shrines, the spirits to their rivers and mountains, yet their presence does not leave. They linger in the sound of water over stones, in the hush of falling snow, in the laughter of a summer festival. To listen to them is to drift into a gentler world, where myth is not finished but ongoing, where each breath carries both memory and promise. As the listener closes their eyes, the eternal country of the gods grows quiet, holding them in its vast, patient arms, until sleep itself becomes a shrine and dreams a path that winds softly into the night.